thing, obviously. My colleague, Selectman Daly, has just reminded me that it is Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday. I have a couple of announcements, and I'll certainly ask everybody else to chip in. Tomorrow night, these 7 p.m. in this room, the Selectmen's hearing room. We'll be hearing comments from town staff and boards and commissions with regard to the 40B application for a comprehensive permit for development at Hancock Village. On Thursday night at 6 p.m., also in this room, the Selectmen's Diversity Study Committee will hold a public hearing on a draft proposed revision of the Human Relations Youth Resources Bylaw, and I'm sure Selectman Daly would like to add to that.
Yes, I just want to say we do have a draft out. It hasn't been voted on, so we're definitely still interested in people's thoughts, and we at our regular meeting last week heard from some of the members of the new members of the Human Relations Commission, and we tried to incorporate some of their ideas as well as other. There's been a smaller drafting subcommittee, and we were trying to get the rest of the committee and members of the public to give us some ideas. So definitely a work in progress, but we're meeting right here, and I believe that draft version is up on the town's website.
You can get it, I think, by going to the calendar where your meeting is posted.
Okay.
I think there's a link to it there.
Okay, great.
I can't do it off the top of my head, but it's definitely posted.
Okay.
And another committee will be making decisions on Friday morning. The Devotion Building Committee will be voting on a preliminary design schemes to be submitted to the State School Building Authority Friday morning, 9 a.m. in room 111.
Chairman DeWitt, can I just ask you
Please.
to tell us in a few words, we're still working, I know there was some discussion about, is the proposal to build a whole new school behind the present one?
There is not a proposal. There are at least 3 different types of proposals that have different different siting configurations, options that, I think there are actually 9 schemes, and the 9 schemes can be clustered into groups. One would be one is a new school, and there are different examples of how to do a new school. Another one is a substantial renovation, and the substantial renovations take on a variety of different forms, which I can't explain without drawings. It appears that we are required to submit to the MSBA one proposal that is nothing. We don't do anything, and I guess that's a baseline for comparison to other options. So of the schemes for renovation and schemes for new construction, there are in each case 2 or 3 different versions, and the committee can choose one or more from each of those. So,
But I think people should know, my understanding is that Devotion House will be, the historic house in front of the school will be left where it is.
I think we have one that clears the site, but I could be wrong about that. Mr. Quigley, you want to shake your head yes or no?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. I believe the Devotion House is on all of the options. I believe the difference is whether or not the 1910 school building is
Right.
Demolished.
Okay.
That's the big
So
difference.
people should know if they're concerned about that portion of the school.
Yes.
That they should perhaps attend this
And
meeting.
I will have to say, there are some options where the Devotion House is in the middle of a playing field, just to be clear. It may not be relocated and it may not be demolished, but it is definitely in a physically curious arrangement with regard to the rest of the site.
But there is an option or under consideration, or has it been rejected, to move the Devotion House to a corner of the...
Nothing has been rejected. I should
Okay,
be clear
so-
about that. So schemes could include a move of a relocation of the Devotion House. There are 2 different sites that have been brought up previously.
Right.
One would be on Stedman Street, and the other is at the corner of Stedman and Harvard. Then there are a variety of schemes involving demolition of the 1910 school building, some demolished more, some demolished less. and then there's at least one that completely clears the site, and if the devotion house is still on it, I don't remember seeing it, but I guess maybe it is, if Mr. Quigley says so. Okay, that's the different things, but no decisions have been made, and there will be a presentation and discussion on Friday morning. Okay?
I was telling somebody on your committee, and I can't remember who I was talking to, but there is a very nice building at Boston College in which they incorporated an old wall from an earlier building.
I've seen it, yeah. right.
Inside the new building. So
Yeah.
if people are concerned about the John F. Kennedy portion of the building where he went to elementary school, you might be able to do
Well,
something like that.
There may be partial demolition choices, you know, some that are more complete than others. Anyway, I think that was all my announcements. Other people have announcements? No?
I think
How about anything that you've done lately
Selectman
that you
Goldstein
want?
is looking for nominations for youth awards, right?
Oh,
Is that
yeah.
still ongoing?
Yeah, that is, I sent out an email, and all I can say is thank you for reminding me, by the way. I'm sorry, I didn't come prepared to talk about it. So
Would you like to get some nominations for youth awards?
Yeah, it's the third annual Brookline Youth Awards. It's sponsored by Javi Braverman at the Brookline
Coolidge.
Hub,
Oh,
HUB.
Brookline Hub. And this is the time of year where we seek nominations for youth between, and I think it's between the ages of 11 and 18 in our town, who have done things which are commendable or exemplary or an inspiration to the town. And to nominate somebody, just go on the Brookline Hub website, brooklinehub.com, and you'll see the nomination papers.
Okay,
Thank you for reminding me.
that's great.
And
And
another.
thinking
Selectman
of,
Benka
oh,
has-
sorry, Selectman Benka.
Yeah,
Speak
just,
up.
of course. On another issue, we actually all received a notice about Brookline Reads. This is a
Yes.
8-day advance
Good for
notice
you.
rather than a 1-day advance notice. On Wednesday, March 12th, William Landay, the author of Defending Jacob, which is the Brookline Reads book now, will be at Brookline High School at 7 p.m. So that's a week from Wednesday.
Great. Glad you remembered that. And I'm just going to remind people that Thursday, the 13th of March, is the deadline for submitting warrant articles for the annual town meeting this May. Okay, we're ready to move on. First item is the minutes from February 25th. Are there corrections
I
and
had
amendments?
some small corrections, which I handed in to Kate.
As did I.
As
Okay.
did I.
Then I will, and I'm sure you caught mine, because I saw at least 2 typos. I will move approval of the minutes from February 25th as amended. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And the next item is a contract for design services at the Old Lincoln School. Mr. Quigley?
Madam Chairman, the question before you tonight is the contract between the town of Brookline and Arrow Street Architecture for the design of renovations to the old Lincoln School. Arrow Street was the firm ranked first by the Designer Selection Committee of 7. And the contract tonight is, again, for design services through construction administration and project closeout in the amount of $300,000. And it's been approved by both the building commission and the school committee.
So, Mr. Quigley, we've had some questions raised, and I'm actually going to ask Selectman Benka to comment as to the timetable, because we recently understand that the school committee may be unclear about what grade levels will be housed at the old Lincoln School.
Well, I think I've been meeting with the school department and building department, the facilities folks, to sort of work on an approach here. And I think that there's a lot of agreement in terms of a lot of the needs are infrastructure, which are going to be useful no matter what grades go into that building. And the old Lincoln School, I think you all remember, while it's a fine old building, it does need a lot of help in terms of infrastructure such as energy efficiency, better control of the heating systems, perhaps new condensate return lines, perhaps a new boiler, perhaps improvements to the temperature control system, maybe some ventilation in the basement, and a whole slew of other items that we need to look at carefully. As I said, those are going to be useful for whatever the building becomes. But beyond that, I think the schools are planning on gearing for middle grades at the current time. And the biggest program component that I can see is the addition of science rooms and labs. And currently, they would not be set up with natural gas because the middle school uses middle grades, excuse me, don't have that type of need, but natural gas could be added in the future. So I think that the schools are pretty clear on what they want. They do want flexibility. They don't want it highly specialized to the extent that they can avoid that, so they can have any type of use going in there. And I'm pretty convinced that that's what they want to get out of it. So we're sort of, the idea here is to meet, if this contract is approved, to meet with the schools and the building department and the architect engineers and take all the list of all the various needs that are there, such as waterproofing of the garage or, stabilization of other building systems, and come up with a list of prioritized items, looking at the budget, and move forward on that regard.
Selectman Baker?
Yeah, Tony, I thank you very much for your response and also for responding to my questions earlier about this. I really want to set this in the context of the fact that there's going to be a public hearing on this issue on Thursday, in the next couple
I
of
think it's Thursday, yeah.
on Thursday, and the letter from Dr. Lupini that indicated that the process is going to be underway to define the appropriate spaces and learning environments in the school, and that the new principal who has been hired for this school will be undergoing that process. What I'm a little concerned about is the schedule that's set forth in the proposed contract that has a schematic design happening over 6 weeks, the existing conditions evaluation going on at the same time, and then design development starting after that, starting in May, when we have a letter saying, well, the populations will probably be defined in September. And it may not, or it may affect the configuration of the building. So what I would, and let me continue, we've got design development in May, construction documents actually in July.
That's right.
And, bidding and negotiation in September.
Right.
While this whole process of designing or
Identifying the actual
identifying the
population.
needs
Yes.
in the school are still in process and still being resolved. So I guess what I would like to add to this contract would be a sentence such as, the schedule in section 2 may be varied and portions of the work may be done in stages or postponed without additional cost. Because I don't want us to be facing change orders with schematic designs being done, and then more information coming in from the schools saying, well, we really want something else.
You mean change orders to the design contract?
Exactly.
Well, okay. We would need to go back and, I would need to go back and recraft the contract and present it back to the building commission and school committee and essentially renegotiate this with the architect.
Okay.
And
Because I do think, just like the schools want flexibility, I think we're going to want flexibility in our relations with this architect, because I think that this is not a program that is defined at this point, and yet the design development is starting.
That, again, I can't necessarily speak to that specific point, whether it's designed, or whether the.
Let me just say, though, because I was on the committee of 7 on this one, and a lot of what we were talking about was mechanicals and
Yeah.
stuff like that. There's not enough money in the proposed budget for a lot of fancy design.
Yeah.
So, frankly, I don't think, I think this is mostly, correct me if I'm wrong here, Tony, because I may not be remembering exactly, but I think it's mostly the kind of stuff that we would need to do, whoever was in that building.
I would tend to agree with that. For example, I think you all remember when Town Hall was there. We have these replacement windows that are probably 15 years old, but you can't open them. And part of the work is to replace the hardware and the balances on them, which we need regardless of who's in the building. And we need a new flat EPDM roof on the top of the building.
Right.
And we need, all of the other, we need to look at the wiring, all the systems, the bathrooms. And it's just, I think, my sense from the schools is that, they're looking, they know that this was most recently used as a school with Runkle, and successfully. And it needs some upgrades to continue being used as a school. And I don't think they're seeing this as a
Yeah, there
wholesale
were some
programmatic.
specific problems and some ventilation
Yeah,
problems,
right.
as I
Well,
remember, and some stuff like that. And we actually had quite a good response to the RFP. We actually met for 2 nights, because we had so many
We did.
people who were interested in this. I don't know, because it's a small contract, I don't know why. But we were looking for people that could do the flexible stuff and kind of give us the flexibility fairly inexpensively, that had some kind of creative
Yeah.
ideas. on
How
that.
about this? On B-3 in the project description, the only item actually in this list that would be contingent on the grade configuration is new science rooms. Everything else is pretty much what Mr. Quigley has mentioned as infrastructure kinds of improvements. So maybe it's not as significant whether or not they've decided that they need science rooms right away. The science rooms might be the last thing they take up.
Right, no, I agree that this contract should get going, and I agree, Selectman Daley, that much of the work is work that is going to have to be done regardless of who's in there or what the academic program is that's in there, and, toilet room and plumbing system renovations, HVAC upgrades, and so forth. But, there are, I think, other items like new science rooms, electrical data and telephone upgrades. I don't know, that may well depend on what the makeup is of the school in terms of data or wiring or availability of internet technology, information technology. So my concern is that there are items on here that do appear to be program dependent, as well as items that are not program dependent. And I would just like to see some sort of flexibility that will ensure that we're not in a situation where we're getting hit with change orders down the road.
Again, just with respect to the electrical and the tel data, the good thing is we have all the drawings of all the work we've ever done in the building forever, and they've been transmitted to the design team in anticipation of this contract being executed. The thought is perhaps some of that wiring may be able to be reused, and that's one of the things we're looking at. And the schools, I think, are looking at perhaps wireless to, minimize the amount of costs for these type of items. I can't tell you that you will not be faced potentially with design changes. But what I am prepared to tell you is that I think we have a fairly good approach here. We can get going, we can have this building ready by September of 15 when they need it. And I would recommend you approve the contract.
What about just something on the science rooms, just some comment there that, you know, revisions to, that science room planning will be the last thing that they do, and that the program, they acknowledge that the program needs might change between now and the time that's done.
Science rooms will be looked at by this design team.
Right, but I don't want them to do that first. I want them to do that after we know for sure what the program is, so. I mean,
That's integral to the program. I'm gonna need those decisions from the school department in the next few weeks.
Right,
we
but,
got a problem.
but we're starting the schematic design process now,
Right.
when this contract's signed.
And they're gonna give us those decisions.
That's not what they're telling the school community.
Yeah.
They're telling the school community they're not making the decisions until September.
Yes, but I think they'll be looking for
Are
a
they
design
planning
that
to
will
put kids in
support
there
whatever
in the
they
fall?
put in the building.
Yeah.
The kids don't go in for a year.
Oh.
What they want is for the design work to be completed this September in order for the work to be done to accept students in September of 15. That's the schedule.
That's right.
And to be honest with you, it may very well be that science labs would be a part of any scheme that includes sixth, seventh, and eighth
That's
grade
right.
students, and therefore, it's not clear to me why it has to be held off. It is
So I think-
exceedingly unlikely that the school department will put preschool children in this building.
Right. No, I agree with
So
that.
the only thing might be you might have more science rooms.
Right.
If you, you know, we're having middle school kids versus
If you're moving
if
in
you were
eighth
having a-
graders from 4 schools.
Yeah.
As opposed to
a
sixth, seventh, and eighth. Right.
Exactly.
But you know, I think that, I mean, as Tony said, he would have to go back to, frankly, I was kind of surprised for the money and what we were asking and everything, that we got so much interest in this. And, you know, I think that, quite honestly, we got interest from a couple of firms that have a Brookline connection, as Arrow Street does. And, you know, I think he would have to go back and renegotiate with them if you're trying to make the
Just to add
contract.
that notation on science rooms, do you think you'd have to do that,
Well,
Tony?
it's a material change to the contract, I would think.
How about this? We have a draft letter from Dr. Lupini, which states, "I will recommend this Thursday," that is Thursday this week, the 6th, I guess, of March, "that the school committee consider our overall plan to utilize Old Lincoln as a transition elementary school for grades 6, 7, and/or 8 during 2015 to 2018. It pretty much lays out 6, 7, and 8.
Or,
And/or eight.
And/or
Could
8,
be or
okay.
8.
But the decision about how many science labs could theoretically not be required to be made as early as the beginning of the schematic process.
You know, I'm just looking at page B5 of our packet, and there's a sentence in there. "We look forward to confirming this schedule as an initial step in the project." I would add after that, with the final schedule subject to the approval of the town, and at that point, I think we can build in whatever flexibility we need. I'm trying to figure out a way to have this go forward without us being constrained by what is, I think, an unrealistic schedule.
Okay, I mean, I'll note that we're already off schedule.
Right.
Yeah,
Because
no,
they were
that's-
assuming
well,
we were
that's
gonna begin
assuming-
early in February.
That's
and
assuming a start in
we're
February.
a month
so-
off.
so
What
they're
if we
talking-
were, what if we were to hold it for 1 week? During that week, contact Arrowhead, see if they will agree to some, you know, language that gives us a little bit of flexibility along the lines of what Selectmen Bank is recommending. We're already a month behind, and one more week isn't gonna substantially affect this.
But I think, because let me ask Tony this, I think I'm hearing from Tony that he is not happy with the suggestion that no decisions be made on the science lab, because he thinks that's an integral part of this project, and they need to be working on that, because that's one of the bigger aspects of what we're asking them to do. Am I hearing you correctly, or do you think
Yes,
that work can be delayed, or decisions can be delayed on science labs?
No, we have to have, no, decisions need to be made, as Selectman Benka correctly pointed out. There's an aggressive schedule there. And I believe the schools and the facilities end of the building department are ready to move along that schedule that's in there, but.
Okay.
I will just say, Tony does a fabulous job at trying to keep things on track once we get going with a
But
project.
there's a huge wild card here, and that is the schools department's decision-making process here that we're not privy to, and that when we started this meeting describing a public hearing that's about to take place later this week on this very subject, so, I don't want to be surprised by a radical change in plans here, at least when it comes to science labs.
Well, this is this is only the contract for design. It's not, I would agree with you if we were talking about a construction contract and we were trying to, commit to large sums of money, not knowing what we were really getting into. But, even if there ends up being some change in this, it's a design contract, it's not.
I could, if it pleases the board, I could, obviously it's your decision, whatever you wish to do here. But perhaps we could postpone this till next week. It's not good for the schedule, but at least it would give the school department an opportunity to do what they're gonna do and perhaps inform you folks better. I'm not sure,
I would be happy to postpone it for a week. I would also be happy to just put in, to write in on what we send back to Arrow Street, some language that says that the schedule is subject to the approval of the town, and that would give you the option to negotiate a schedule at that point that has the work potentially done in stages. And if Arrow Street objects to that, then we can deal with it at that point. But if we want to get the contract signed today, I'd be inclined to just put that protective clause in
Well,
that
if you have
allows
the
us-
wording, I can try and see, run it by them, if you had some,
And that's kind of implied in the way the sentence is worded. so-
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So I would be shocked if they would object to something
Right.
as.
I suspect they
innocuous
wouldn't,
as
but
that.
they're not, if you're talking about potentially doing separate bid packages, that would be an objection on their part, I have no doubt about that.
Right. Well, the language, do you want us to sign this today and just put in some protective language?
Well, the problem is, it's already been voted by.
By both the school committee and the
School
building
committee and
commission. I
building
mean, we,
commission. So
we,
Tony would have to
they
go
would have to go
back.
back to them. It's not going to the,
Why don't we, if I could suggest, Madam Chairman, why don't we tell Tony what we're looking for in terms of language, and, but sign the contract subject to that, and if it doesn't work, we'll come back next week.
Are they both in the building tonight, Tony?
Who both?
The school committee, are they
Not
here?
tonight.
No, not tonight.
well, they couldn't
The
take it
building
out.
commission's here.
They couldn't add it to an agenda anyway, right? They've already voted it. They
But you may
can't.
not need very substantial language if you go back to Arrow Street, tell them what the issue is, and sort of
Just the
work something
school
out.
committee, I think, only meets every other week.
Right.
On the science room,
So
that's,
that might be a
subject to
potentially
final-
longer delay.
Subject to final, program.
Or you could agree, how about this, which is taking it in a very different approach, but say, we will not agree to any additional costs regardless of the timetable.
Then
You know?
That's not gonna work. You know, I honestly, I think that, I mean, I understand your concerns, but we don't live in a perfect system here. We're doing the best we can with the information that we have. I believe we'll be able to prosecute this if you sign it effectively and efficiently. I can't guarantee that I won't be back here with a design change, but, you know, based on what I understand the school's needs to be, to have that September 15, we need to move forward. It's not a perfect system.
So can I recommend that we do just what Mr. Kleckner proposed, that in paragraph 1, next to the second bullet point that says new science rooms, we just add the in parentheses, subject to final program determination. Just leave it at that. And that.
Can I just ask, I know the school committee only meets every other week, and I want to know when they're meeting next, because we may be delaying this by several weeks if they're not scheduled to meet.
I don't think so, not according to Mr. Kleckner's plan. We would do this, and it would really just be up to Arrow Street to say whether they can accept it or not.
No, the school committee and the building commission has signed the contract the way it is. It has to go back to everybody if there's a change in it.
Well, what we're really doing is building in more protection for the town.
How about this?
And I think the issue would be if Arrow Street objected to this. If Arrow Street didn't object to that, then I don't see that there's any problem with building in the flexibility for the town.
Yeah, I guess that's the way I looked at it, Nancy, was that it was really an accommodation that Arrow Street was making as opposed to something the town would have to give up, and as a result, I don't see it as a problem going back to the school committee, the building commission at some future time, but Arrow Street would have to make that determination, whether they're comfortable with that.
Is Jocelyn still in the room? I mean, I don't think legally we can change something and have it not go back to the other boards that okayed a different version.
I guess
So-
what I was suggesting was, if we did that, would Arrow Street be willing to begin to proceed, knowing that subsequently the town would have to approve a minor amendment to the
I suspect they
agreement?
would. But I can't say for certain.
Okay.
So if you folks have some wording, I'll run it by them first thing in the morning, I guess.
So, again, I think the change that I would propose is on the second bullet point 1, after new science rooms, just put in parenthetically, subject to final program determination. And in the paragraph 2 on schedule, where it says we look forward to confirming the schedule as an initial step in the project, adding, again, subject to the final program determination by the town. Or after final program determination by the town.
Well, subject to final.
Now,
program.
subject to, no, go back to subject. I mean, I do think you need to adjust the dates in paragraph 2 anyway, since it says start of work is February 3rd, 2014. We're already a month past that.
We're actually approaching the 6-week mark.
And I think,
But okay, I'm willing to go with that if it means a lot to you. But you do see from the schedule, the schematic design is supposed to be done in the first 6 weeks. So they have to hit the ground running on this and not wait for,
but that's the very issue that is an issue of concern. If they're doing the schematic design, but they don't know what the program is, this is an unrealistic schedule.
Well,
They can
okay,
do.
so you actually do want to delay
They-
the implementation of this?
No, I think that they, certainly the existing conditions evaluation is something that can start immediately and should start immediately. And I think schematic design work on things like the HVAC and plumbing and so forth. But windows and the other non-program related tasks, I think, can start immediately and be completed immediately. But if we're going to be holding them back for some program determination, now, if the schools are going to be ready in 2 weeks, then we're fine.
Well, I think the only potential issue with them starting on certain items that we think are no-brainers for this is that their understanding is they're gonna be engaged with the school department and the building department to work on the appropriate scope, because quite frankly, the funds we have for construction are not gonna cover all the program and infrastructure needs. So you can't really say, go ahead and proceed with the plumbing, because although that may be an obvious thing we're gonna proceed with, until we go through that exercise, it's not obvious.
Well, and that's the whole thing about science rooms.
I mean, and
They
that
need
kind of brings us
sinks, they
full
need-
circle.
yeah,
Now,
right.
I mean, that kind of makes the argument that, how can you start the
You know,
schematic design now?
folks,
Because they're designing the $3 million. It's incumbent on the town to make sure that we work with them so they can come up with a design that doesn't exceed that $3 million.
right.
Well, the other way to look at it, more in keeping with Selectman Daley's point of view, is the school committee's already signed off on it, and this is, you know, this is their call, and if it turns out later, it's, you know, that's,
And I
that's,
would
that's
even
where the
add,
fault lied.
it
Right.
is the building commission who often is the monitoring agent for this kind of work. And between the school committee having to give them a program, which I do not dispute, because if there's no program, they don't know what to do. But the school committee must work with the building commission in order for this contract to go forward. It just can't happen without that. So, I mean, my own feeling is that we could just trust the groups who are involved with this to deliver what's supposed to be delivered, as opposed to micromanagement.
Okay, so I got a counter proposal. The counter proposal is approve this as is right now. That doesn't mean that we can't go back and ask for those clarifications after the fact. Since they're so small, I don't think that there'll be a problem. But that's the take it on faith approach. I'd still like to incorporate the amendments that Selectman Banker correctly points out we should be concerned about, but I think, accommodating Selectman Daley's point of view, I don't know if we should be holding up the process for it either.
We could, however, communicate our concern to the school committee and the building commission.
Right.
Right.
And then that would be part of our vote.
And maybe we should do that. Okay,
All right, so
so
I gotta.
what's the motion?
So I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion that we vote to approve the Arrow Street contract as submitted, with the caveat that we request that Mr. Quigley consult with the building commission and the school department to, and with the contractor, Arrow Street, to include contract revision that accommodates the lack of a final program determination for the site, and leaves flexibility for final final, you know, program allocations and with respect to science rooms. Program
That
determinations.
was a lot of words.
A lot of words off the top of my head, yes.
Okay, but this is part of the vote,
Did you
not the
get all that?
contract, so we're gonna sign
part
the
of the
contract.
vote, not the
Right,
contract.
okay, that's fine, no, that's reasonable accommodation.
Everybody got that?
Did Kate
The
get
question
it?
is, does
That's the
Kate
important
have
thing.
it?
Do you want to restate it? Would you try restating it, please, Kate?
That's unfair.
Why don't you restate it? Determination, I think.
respect to science rooms, let's just leave it at that. That's okay.
It's just been my experience that lots of things can delay projects, and we're starting already a number of weeks behind what was
But
anticipated.
we're
so-
not gonna delay it with this.
Right.
All we're
So that's-
asking is a little
yeah.
bit of extra work after the fact
Okay.
to gain that
Okay,
Assurance.
contractual
Yeah.
assurance, right?
Okay?
Okay?
We're not going to try to read that one back, but I'm going to say, all in favor, please say aye.
You can go to the
Selectman,
tape if necessary.
Selectman Daley.
Aye.
Selectman Benka.
Abstain.
Selectman Goldstein. Selectman Waschinsky.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Uh,
Tony.
Let's see if the next one will have the same level of interest. This Miss Galantine.
Good evening, Erin Galantine, Director of Parks and Open Space in Brookline. The town has been successful in receiving a $70,000 grant from the Department of Conservation and Recreation to work on the construction bid documents for the Route 9 Washington Street crossing, as was approved by the Board of Selectmen in March 2013. And so this evening I ask for the board to accept the grant and authorize Town Administrator Mel Kleckner to execute said contract.
Selectman Daley.
good job getting the grant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Selectman Waschinsky.
What's the timeframe on the project?
Timeframe, it's hard to tell because with the project itself, what we'll be doing now is we will have $70,000 from the Commonwealth to match a equal amount from in CDBG funding. So we'll come back to you to do an extra work order for the consulting services. So they will do the construction bid docs, but we're moving forward into the TIP process. And so it really depends where we fall in terms of a year of construction with the TIP. There's a lot of interest in this project, so it may be that it is in an earlier year.
So this is on a separate track than Gateway East?
It is separate track, but very well coordinated with Gateway East.
And Gateway East, as I recall, is sort of queued up to match safety, is that right?
To,
The tips,
it's in the queue.
right,
Yes.
okay. All right, I think that was the question. Yes, Selectman Benka.
Okay, I have to ask the question. On page C2, which is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Standard Contract Form, there's a contract end date, which states that contract performance shall terminate as of June 30th, 2014, with no due obligations being incurred after this date, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So this is
it-
actually,
I mean, does that mean
It
that,
says unless the
grant.
contract is properly amended.
No, but it's a grant, right?
it
Yeah.
is a grant. It
so
is,
is this just the grant, we'll get the money now
that's right.
prior to June 30th,
That-
and then okay,
That's right.
okay.
And it's a little different than some of their other partnerships grants, which sometimes they even do the work and the town partners in the other direction and they execute that. They actually work with the contractors, but in this case, once we execute the contract, they actually issue us a check for us to continue the work.
We just gotta
Okay.
cash the check by June 30th, right? Otherwise. the
That's a good
contract-
question, though.
Okay.
We don't have to do the work by June 30th, in other words, right?
We don't what?
We don't have to do the work by June 30th. We don't
No.
have to do the.
We probably have to enter into a contract or something, though, by then, right?
The contract with them needs to be
No,
executed.
we probably have to enter into contract with someone who's gonna do the actual work.
That's right, and frankly, we have them, we'll just be doing an extra work order to continue that work.
Okay.
And we get the float.
And we get the float.
Okay, we think, could we,
The interest on the money until then.
all right,
Yeah, exactly.
all right, can we move this one? We are running a
Yes.
little behind, folks. All right, I move that we accept a grant and execute a contract in the amount of $70,000 with the Department of Conservation and Recreation for the Washington Street Route 9 pedestrian and bicycle crossing project, and that we authorize the town administrator to execute said contract on behalf of the town. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see if we can quickly go through the Fisher Avenue streetscape.
Oh, are you skipping one?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Ditto.
Yep.
Yes, I did skip the concrete floor because my things are out of order.
Okay, we have a contract in front of you for awarding to Patriot Restoration, and it's for restoring the, what we call a tipping floor at the transfer station. And the way our operation works is the town collects the trash, drives into the building, deposits the trash on the floor, and a private contractor scoops that up with a front-end loader and loads it into a tractor-trailer. And over the years, the blades on the front-end loader been scraping the concrete so much to the point that the reinforcing steel is now being exposed, and it's beginning to present a hazard. So this contract here is to survey the floor, we'll clean it up, survey it, water blast all the areas that are beginning to fail, and then resurface the floor.
With something sturdier?
Actually, it's a structural slab, and it's quite substantial. And this will increase the structural stability of the floor.
Okay. Selectman Daley?
Yeah, we seem to have a lot of trouble with our floors, but my question is really similar to Chairman DeWitt's. What, are we going to put something protective down on top of this after we resurface?
This will be a skim coat of a high compressive strength concrete, and it'll have epoxy mixed in with it, which gives us a lot of resistance to scratching.
And there's also, according to the contract, a hardener sealer that's applied.
Right.
Okay.
All right, we ready to move? Yep. I move that we award contract number PW 14-24 for transfer station concrete floor repair in the amount of $56,665 to Patriot Restoration, Inc. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. You're going to help us with the Fisher Avenue streetscape also, Mr. Ditto?
Yeah, actually, you got me for the next 5.
Yeah, that's what I thought. You're going to be up for a while. Okay, so maybe we can go through them individually, and then we'll vote them all together. So why don't you start with Fisher Avenue, and then these are,
As you all know, we're going to be reconstructing Fisher Ave this year, and a big part of that will be what happens in front of the area that's being built into a park. So we negotiated with Coppola Martin Design Group, who is the architect on the playground, to assist us in designing something that would be consistent with what the park's going to end up looking like. And so this gives us an opportunity to do some streetscaping and designs to increase the safety of the pedestrians and parking vehicles in front of the park. The contract is in the estimate of $18,900, and it consists a minimum of 4 staff meetings and 5 public hearings. At the end of the day, we'll have 100% design drawings that are ready to go out to bid.
okay, Selectman Daley, and then,
So my question is about the parking, and as we're doing this street area over, what provisions are we making for parking? Because I assume that people in the neighborhood aren't going to want people parking in front of their houses all day long.
I think what we're looking at is approximately 25 spaces along the park side of the street.
Is that like some angled parking
There'll
or?
be parallel parking,
So just out in the street,
yes.
regular, no indentation?
No.
What about having a little indentation?
Well, there will be bulb outs as you come up, say, from Clinton Road up Fisher Ave. There'll be a bulb out on either side to kind of introduce you to the fact that you're coming in front of the playground. And at that bulb out, there'll be a crosswalk. So that cuts the crossing distance down the street by about 20%. And then when you get down toward Leicester and Channing, there'll also be bulb outs there for crosswalks also.
I think they call it Lester.
You
Selectman
know what I
Goldstein?
meant.
Yeah.
Mr. Ditto, as you know, I know that Fisher Ave is in desperate need of reconstruction, has been for a long time, and this winter's been just absolutely brutal on it. There's no clear path to get down Fisher without hitting a pothole. You just can't do it. My question, though, is when I've asked about Fisher Hill in the past, I think, if I recall correctly, I heard that it wasn't going to be done until after the park was finished because of the heavy equipment that is still going to have to travel over it. And maybe I'm confusing that with the Olmsted Park, with the housing, with the heavy equipment for Olmsted Park. But I don't want to find that we reconstruct Fisher and then it all gets torn up again as the construction of the park continues.
Right.
Is my fear worth the effort of expressing or not?
My time frame on the street will probably be getting under construction in August and probably won't finish till October. By that time, I think the serious construction site work at the playground will be done by that time.
You do, okay.
Yeah.
When are we scheduled to be absolutely finished with the playground, with the park?
With the park itself,
Yeah.
I don't know what the schedule, I know they're up there working now.
Ms.
Right.
Galantine, can you help us here? I bet you know.
We're going to have the substantial amount of the work done in the park by the end of November, beginning of December, that per our schedule right now. However, we allotted for a 2-year construction period, knowing that there are going to be some unforeseen circumstances, and a lot of, even when we're done with the heavy work, the field is going to have to grow in. There'll be a period of time where we'll have to wait before we actually allow access. So what Peter and I have been talking about is certainly being able to do the work on Fisher Ave, do the grading, put down the binder course, and just not do that top course until we're sure that we're not going to have to cut in for any additional utilities, and that we do have the majority of what would be heavy equipment for the construction work done.
Great, glad you guys are on it, thank you.
Selectman Baker?
Yeah, and Nancy, were you asking about parking for the park users?
Yes.
There's also a parking lot
Okay.
at the park, and I, what, 20, 25 spaces? I'm not sure of the number, Aaron.
There are 22 spaces on site. We're actually working with the neighborhood about parking in front of the park, and they were really pleased that we're going from having parking on both sides of the road to really working to slow down traffic and have parking move to the park side of the road. And we're also in discussions with Newbury College about what would be our peak time when we have more vehicles at any one point in time on game days, on Saturdays and Sundays, and if we could possibly use some of their lots for overflow, and they've been very open to that. So we'll continue to work with the neighborhood and with Newbury College to track what's happening with parking.
We'll have to try to reschedule our stuff for graduation day and things
The,
like that.
But that parking lot on-site is one of the easiest ways to get into the park, so I think people tend to use that rather than park on the street and have to climb over the hill or go upstairs.
I have one more question, and I know you're aware of this too, Peter. Down Fisher Ave towards Boylston Street, towards Route 9, there's a kind of a dangerous situation that appears every year this time, where the underground water spring seems to be coming out from the middle of the pavement. Is there a plan to address that situation permanently?
Yes,
Okay.
we'll be putting new under drains in that side of the street, coming down from Gloucester down to Boylston.
Other
Since this-
questions?
Since this winter is never ending, you must have quite a pile of ice there.
Oh, it was last year too. It was
Yeah.
the water on the thaw days pours out of the pavement, it refreezes, turns into a sheet of ice downhill, into Route 9. It's we're lucky that nothing's gone wrong there so far.
Okay, I'm going to move that we award and execute contract number PW 14-30, design services for Fisher Avenue Streetscape in the amount of $18,900 with Klepper Martin Design Group. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The next four items are all extra work orders.
We did.
I'm going to ask Mr. Ditto to go through them quickly and then try to vote them as one group, because I believe this work is already completed. Is that right?
It is.
Okay, quickly then, go through, go off, run.
Quickly, F, with-
F, G, H, and I.
Yep. DNR General Contracting, this is the final change order. We had a increase in the amount of drainage structures that we actually adjusted, and that 1,307 is the additional amount that we need. That is the final change
Item?
order on the street, and I will be coming back next week with a reimbursement request for $141,000 from Chapter 90. And
Great.
that completes that project. The next one, extra worker number 2 for $7,900 for emergency street light and fire alarm services. That's funds to, from the accident recovery account to take care of repairs that we made to the street lights and fire alarm services, as well as money to carry us to the end of the year. And again, that's that special account from accident recovery. Extra work order number 1 to Park Landscape Associates. This was, has to do with 3 paths that we've completed restoration work on, and they involve Clinton Path doing extra concrete and rail repairs in the tune of $4,350. Addington Path, we did extra concrete and rail work there also in the tune of $3,640. In Mason Path, again, extra concrete and rail repairs for $6,600. And we had to repair a catch basin in Mason Path to the tune of $6,650 for a total of $21,240. And again, that work is all complete.
Okay, item I.
Mario Susi and Son, this is Walnut Street. We had to do some extra work behind sideline, repairing brick pavers and some concrete steps, and that value was $1,633.51, and that will complete that project.
All right, are there any questions for Mr. Ditto with regard to F, G, H, and I?
Unfortunately, yes.
Oh, go right ahead, Selectman Baker.
One very quick question with regard to item F, the Clark Road reconstruction. When that process was starting, we heard from a number of neighbors about a crosswalk mid-block, or requests or thinking about a crosswalk mid-block, and I'm just wondering whether that issue has been resolved with the neighbors. I know there isn't one there at this point.
Yes.
The concern was that the reconstruction and the finishing would essentially speed up traffic on the street, and I'm wondering whether the concern about that issue has died down.
It has died down, but last year we actually went out and did speed counts and volume counts and did an analysis. And this is assuming they wanted that crosswalk further on down the street towards Sumner, I think was where these people were concerned. So we put the tubes out there, got the speed and the volume counts, as well as did a study on it for sight distances. And both the speed was not high enough to justify a crosswalk as well as a sidewalk. We haven't heard anything back from the
Okay.
neighbors, so I assume we're all okay.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick comment.
Please.
On I noticed that the extra work order includes traffic signal conduit at Walnut and Cypress. I would suggest that you check the timing of that traffic signal. Just, it doesn't seem right.
Okay?
All right, I'm going to move items F, G, H, and I in the language as printed in the calendar. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And then finally, we have temporary alcoholic beverage licenses, items J and K. Are there questions with regard to either of these?
Nope.
Then I move items J and K in the language printed in the calendar. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Well, now we get to the serious stuff. Heaven only knows, Commissioner Papasturgeon.
You asked for it.
Snow and ice. All right, tell us about it.
I'm gonna go through, I know you're behind times a little bit, but I'm gonna go through and give you a very quick summary as to where we are right now with our snow and ice control budget. And then we have 4 requests for approval for extra work orders that will be tied into that discussion. And then the final item, of course, is talking about the additional piece of equipment. Right now, we have had 19 what we call snow and ice events this year. They started on December 7th, and those are running to date. We've accumulated about 62 inches of snow this season so far. I say so far because I'm hoping that it's 62 final, but we'll see. The
Yeah, then
big,
you
Dream
shouldn't-
on.
You shouldn't say so far, because that sounds like more is coming.
well, that's why I said I hope that that's final.
The man is a realist.
The big story this year is the road salt. You've all been following the news stories about the availability of road salt. We too have had our problems this year. In a normal winter, we use about 2,500 tons of road salt for snow and ice control. This year, we have used almost 6,100 tons of road salt, and that does not include the 1,800 ton that I have currently in inventory at the Municipal Service Center. We were fortunate through our contracts with International Salt to be able to push them a little bit to get the deliveries that we needed. At the lowest point, I'm going to say we had probably about 600 ton on hand, which makes me a little bit nervous when we're in the middle of the season. So we're in good shape right now. We've used a lot of salt. We have a full shed as we speak, and hopefully we won't have to use any more salt this year, and we'll close out the year with a full shed and have it ready and available for the beginning of the season next year. That's the good news about snow and ice this year. The bad news is that we are running a deficit. You know that because I came before you in January and asked you to invoke Chapter 44, Section 31 of Massachusetts General Law, which allows us the ability to deficit spend the snow and ice budget. Well, we have done that, and the news right now is that we are running a deficit of about $1.4 million. Just a quick break.
Andy, how does that compare? To other deficit years?
Well, I knew you were going to
About to
ask
tell me that, right?
I knew you
Okay.
were going to ask me that, so I prepared a chart that shows how much we had. Last year, we had a deficit of just a little over $1 million. In 2011, we ran a $1.88 million deficit, so almost $1.9 million. In 2010, it was about $586,000. In 2011, 2009, which was one of the big years, it was 1.2 million in deficit. 2008, 834,000, and 2006, 419,000. So it's not the highest deficit that we've run. 2011 still stands as the record year for deficits, closely followed by 2009, but of course, it's a lot more than I'd like to see it. I'm sure it's a lot more than you would like to see it, but nonetheless, that's what it is right now. We have incurred deficits in overtime, in-house overtime of about 500,000. Contractual services, which is the money that's used to pay when we bring a contractor in for plowing operations and for hand shoveling around schools. We're in deficit there, about $458,000. Sand, salt, and de-icer, $312,000. And motor vehicle supplies, $176,000. That's for repairing equipment. Of the 19 snow and ice events, over half of them were plowable, which means that we had probably at times over 100 pieces of equipment on the road fighting the storm. Having said that, we have before you 4 extra work orders on the contractual side of the business. On the procurement of supplies, we don't need an extra work order because we just extend the purchase order. But on our contractual services, where we actually have the board sign and execute contracts, when we overspend those contracts, we have to have extra work orders approval. The first one is for D'Alessandro Corporation, who is our primary contractor for snow plowing. It's extra work order number 1, and that's in the amount of $410,000. And I should let you know that includes about a $50,000 buffer, hopefully to get us through the remainder of the year if we so need it. If we don't need it, of course, that money will be liquidated and put back into the pot. LaRusso Corporation is our prime contractor for removing yard waste and other disposal items. The area where yard waste is stored at the Municipal Service Center is also the area that we use for the overflow snow dump. In order to make room for additional snow storage, we had to have that material removed from the DPW storage facility. That's for $20,000, and we don't anticipate any further expenditures on that. Park Landscape Associates is the contractor that provides hand shovelers and small equipment that we use when needed for clearing schools and other public buildings to augment our own forces. That extra work order is for $57,200. And the last one, Northern Tree, who you know is our forestry contractor. There were several storms where we had quite a bit of limb damage, and we had to bring Northern Tree in on standby to deal with both wind, ice, and snow problems with the trees. So those are all the extra work orders that are tied with this. That money is also included, you should know, in the deficit amount that I reported to you at the beginning.
Oh, okay, that
So
was
that's-
actually my final question, thank
Yes.
you.
That, the 1.4 million includes all of these extra work orders. So,
Okay,
I have
yes,
a
Selectman Daley.
question about the Park Landscape Associates. I thought your people did the clearing around the schools. Is this new?
we do,
Or
no,
this has been,
we budget $25,000 in the snow and ice budget for additional hand laborers when we need them. We do not call them in every time, but if we get a foot of snow or 15 inches of snow, and we're pushing to try to get schools open, we sometimes bring they're on standby. We'll bring them in, and they have bobcats, and they have snow blowers, and they have hand shovels that help our folks out and getting the job done quicker.
Okay,
On
other
the,
questions?
D'Alessandro contract, so it's for $410,000. How many hours does that translate to?
Oh, my God. I don't know the number offhand, it's a lot.
But it amounts to a specific hourly
Oh,
rate,
yes.
right?
Yes,
So
we pay them by the hour for various pieces of equipment.
And how do we verify that?
They actually come in and punch a time clock. When they punch the time clock, we also issue them a GPS device that they take with them, so we know where they are.
Okay, and because 410,000 is a pretty round number to the 10,000, so
Well-
that's what made me ask.
Of the 410,000, only 360,000 is what we owe them right now.
Yeah.
I built $50,000 in there going forward, because I don't want to have to come back if we have another storm in the next week or two, I don't want to have to come back. So we build a cushion in there, but if we don't spend that cushion,
I
it
see,
gets
so the
liquidated.
actual number we owe them right now isn't quite as round as
Correct.
410,000.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, Selectman Daley.
I would just want to mention while you're here and we're talking about snow, that I continue to get some complaints from the Tappan Street people. And I will say that I don't know, about a month ago or something, during a snowstorm, I was walking down that way to get to the T, because I couldn't really drive in that particular storm. And I did see a plow going along at a pretty good clip on Tappan Street. So I just remind you that they would like the plows to go slowly on that side where there's not much of a buffer between the,
Well, let me report to you a little bit about what's happened on Tappan Street. We're very cognizant of the issues on Tappan Street. The issue is, we have a fairly wide road with fairly narrow sidewalks on one side. We do plow one side of Tappan Street because it's the access route towards the high school. On the side of the street where we do not plow the sidewalk, at times the plow will go by, after you've gotten a substantial amount of snow. If the plow was going too fast, it would push some of the snow banking over from the curb, because we do try to plow curb to curb in this town for obvious reasons. And it would then re-block the sidewalk, and I recognize that that's a problem. We did meet with the people up there last year, and.
well, this year, you
Well, we
had
met with them
me at one
last
of the-
year. We met
Okay.
with them last year also, Selectman Daley. And we did come up with the plan that we would try to slow the equipment down so that it wasn't pushing the snow as far. The blades are curved, and the faster you go, the further the arc is on the curb. I think that was very successful for most of the season this year. We didn't have any complaints from the folks on Tappan Street until the last couple of storms. And at that point, there was some substantial snows, and the plow might have been going a little bit fast, and he did block the sidewalks again. So we did meet with the folks again up there this year, and we did come up with an alternate plan that, yes, number one, we would try to keep the plows at a slower speed. We try to keep them around 15 miles an hour or so. And in that area, I instructed the driver, who happens to be one of our veterans, to keep it down even around 10 miles an hour. But what we agreed to do was, as the snow banks built up, so that we wouldn't have to try to keep pushing old snow back onto the sidewalk, we agreed to run the gutter, we call it. And that's actually remove the snow bank along the gutter and take it away, so that we had more room to put fresh snow without pushing the old banking back onto the sidewalk. We haven't had to do that. We did clean the bank, run the gutter one time in anticipation of further snow, but we haven't had the additional snow to see if it works. So we're very cognizant of that, of what's happening on Tappan Street. And I should tell you that Tappan Street is not unique. There are situations all over town where we have wide roads with narrow sidewalks, and the problems are very similar. And folks do go out, and they do make a yeoman's effort to clear the sidewalks, so.
I do actually want to just comment that we did get, and I believe copied to you, some issues that came from residents with regard to enforcement of the sidewalk clearing bylaw.
Yes.
And I wonder if you'd like to comment about that. Not what you clear, but what residents are expected to clear, required to clear.
We do get quite a few complaints about enforcement of the sidewalk bylaw. As you know, it is complaint-driven. We just don't have the resources to go out and blanket the town after each storm. So when we get a complaint, we do send folks out, and we do an area-wide sweep, and if citations need to be written, we write them. The town is broken into 4 separate districts with Public Works, Police, Building, and Health, which is basically the code enforcement folks in town, each taking a separate district. So if we do get a complaint, we forward it to the particular enforcement agency, and then all those complaints, all those citations come back to us, and we maintain them in our database. We do step up enforcement. The bylaw says that we issue a warning first each fiscal year, and then after that, subsequent violations are citations, and we do that. I don't have the exact numbers as to how many citations we've written this year, but we've written quite a few. One of the areas of concern was along Beacon Street, and those citations were issued. To be quite frank with you, we can write warnings and we can write citations, and if the homeowner still doesn't want to cooperate, I mean, we can continue to write citations, but there's nothing that I can do to make them clear the walk, to actually clear it, and we'll continue to get complaints.
But in fact, I'd be curious to know, maybe this is a finance question, do we actually collect the fines that are imposed?
Oh, yes.
All right, so
Yes.
some people just pay the fine and don't clear the
Yes, they do.
sidewalk? I
Yes.
see. Okay, other questions for the commissioner? Just with regard to, now we're dealing with the items that are part of the snow and ice deficit. There's an additional one that we'll treat separately. Any other questions on these items? I'm just going to say for the record that the 4 work order items out of the $1.4 million of deficit represents about $500,000. It's close to $500,000. And then we have an additional separate item which sort of relates to the sidewalk question. So would you like to tell us about that too?
Yes, it does, and I'd be happy to. One of the big complaints we get is the timely clearing of snow from the sidewalks that are our responsibility to do that. And we currently are required to clear about 42 miles of sidewalk as part of the agreements that were reached years ago from the Moderators Committee on Snow Removal. Most of them are sidewalks either in commercial areas or areas leading to and from schools. As you know, the folks that drive the sidewalk tractors are a lot of times the same folks who drive the snow plows, or the same folks that do the shoveling, or the same folks that drive that pick up the rubbish. So it's a really big juggling act sometimes to make sure that we get the right number of resources where we need them. We do rely on our fleet of equipment for clearing sidewalks. Right now, we have 4 Bombardier tractors. Those are the tractors that look like little snow machines with cleats on them that actually plow snow, and they're only used for snow removal. They're not used for anything else the rest of the year. They are really the piece of equipment that we rely on the heaviest for removing snow on sidewalks. We have what we call 3 Holder. Holder is the manufacturer's name, articulating tractors that are tractors that we can use for other purposes in other times of the year. And in the wintertime, we outfit them with either snow blowers or plow blades. And we have 2 trackless rubber tire machines that are also all-purpose tractors. These pieces of equipment are all assigned to clearing sidewalks. And as I said, we've found over the years that the most efficient piece of equipment is the Bombardier tractor itself, even though it's solely dedicated for snow removal. Of the 4 Bombardier units that we currently have in our fleet, 3 of them are 1994 models. And one of them is a more recent 2008 model. And that's the one that we were approved to buy a few years back. These pieces of equipment take an awful beating, as you can imagine. So a 1994 model unit, it's 20 years old, and sometimes it's a real task to try to keep them running. And in any given time, based on our maintenance records, 2 of these 4 machines are down and out of service. Not only are they down and out of service, a lot of times we have a difficulty getting repair parts for them. A lot of times we have to jury rig and manufacture our own parts. But the problem is, as the machines get older, they get more,
Accident prone.
well, not only accident prone, but they're very
Failure.
poorly insulated as compared to the new models. They're very poorly insulated, they're inadequately ventilated, so that any fumes that you get from outside the machine, even though you're in a closed cab, they can tend to be drawn into the cab. And at a lot of times, we really fear assigning folks to those tractors for their own safety. And we've tried many different ways to correct the problem, but it's just the nature of the design of the machine. The new machine, including the 2008 machine that we have, is modernly equipped. It's insulated, it's ventilated. There's a heater in the cab, and it's air cushioned seats and more modern controls. It's a whole different machine.
The
even
lap
though
of
it-
luxury.
Even though it's the same, well, if you're sitting in one of these tractors for 24 hours, you need a little bit of luxury. We just can't repair them any longer. Of the 4 machines, one of them is fairly new. That's a good machine. One of the remaining 3, I think, is still in good enough shape that we can maintain it and keep it going. But 2 of them are in really poor condition. The opportunity has presented itself to us to be able to purchase a brand-new machine, and I will tell you, it's the last machine available on the East Coast. Because of the winter that's occurred across the country, there are no other machines available. We're fortunate enough to actually have the machine sitting in our shop right now. They brought it by as a demo. It's equipped with a very large, powerful snow thrower that has the ability to actually throw snow into a truck following along the street.
They brought it by, and you're not letting them take it away.
Well, they're gonna take it away pretty soon. But the opportunity has arisen for us to be able to buy this machine, trading in 2 of the old machines towards the price, brings the price down to $132,900 to purchase this machine. We think that if we get this machine and rework the other machine, we'll have 3 really good pieces of equipment in addition to the other 3 pieces of equipment that we use, and can do a better job and a more timely job clearing the public sidewalks that are our responsibility to do. And it's a machine that I now can feel confident assigning somebody to, with regard to their own personal safety. So I'm respectfully asking your approval to allow us to do an emergency purchase of this machine. Of course, it would be charged off to the snow and ice budget, so.
This would be
Okay.
an additional deficit item, is that?
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, it's
yes.
included in the 1.4.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's not included
Ah,
in
it's
1.4.
added to the
Yes, ma'am.
1.4. Okay, that's important to know.
Yes.
Sorry.
So are we paying a premium for it because of the severity of the winter and the demand for this equipment?
Actually, I think they're giving us a pretty good price on it.
Yeah, because
I
it's
think
kind of
they-
the end of the
I think
season.
they
so,
wanna,
yeah.
they wanna get rid of it.
Last
They
year's
don't wanna
model.
bring it
Last
back,
year's
so,
model, all right.
yeah.
I mean,
And
how's
it's
the
a-
price compared to the 2006 one that you have?
Oh, these machines go up in price all the time.
I'm sure.
I think the machine that we bought in 2008 was probably 110,000. The machines now are up around 140,000.
Last week, we bought some equipment on a lease-to-own basis.
Yes.
And we're not buying this on a lease-to-own basis, is there?
This was not anticipated to buy. I mean, if it was, we probably would have included it under a lease purchase. In fact, going forward, if a piece like this is included in a future budget, it would probably be included. I'm not sure whether or not the purchasing agent can do that and get that amended into this. I'm not quite sure, but we didn't anticipate doing this purchase, so therefore it wasn't included.
Selectman Daley?
I just have a couple questions. One, I assume that you check, I hear that the Canadians do a good job on snow removal stuff, so I assume you check what kind of equipment they're using and.
This tractor is manufactured in Canada.
Oh,
Say it's
okay.
Canadian, is it
Okay.
Bombardier?
No.
Bombardier.
Okay. My second question is, this is a point of interest for the Age-Friendly City Committee, that even though under our plan that you formulated, or your predecessor formulated with the Moderators Committee many years ago, the town does clear the sidewalks in the commercial areas, but the commercial property owners or their tenants are still responsible. Like if you're busy clearing the roads and you don't get to that sidewalk until the next day, they are still responsible under our bylaw to clear things, are they not?
Yes, they are.
Because they don't seem to understand that. I've actually
Well-
talked to people a couple times and said, hey, it's slippery out here, why aren't you guys doing something? And they say, oh, the town takes care of it. And-
You are correct, it is their responsibility, even if we clear it once we clear it, it's their
Mm-hmm.
responsibility to maintain it, and to sand it and salt it, or whatever is required. I did meet with the Chamber of Commerce last week.
Okay.
And I've met with Harvey Braveman, and we talked about that very point, and he assured me that the word would get out and get back to the commercial folks that indeed is their responsibility.
And the other thing that a lot of older people were mentioning was that nobody kind of clears the pathways. So to get, you park your car, and you've got to climb over a mountain of ice to get to the parking meter and get into the store. And is anybody responsible for that, or is that just a matter of good business to maybe
Well,
have some openings there?
In addition to the sidewalks, we do also clear the crosswalks, which are on the ends of the street or wherever they are. The handicap ramps, the crosswalks, we go in and do all of that. Mid-block, unless we're gonna do a snow removal operation, which we do from time to time. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. There is a snowbank there, and it seems to me that the business owner who abuts that sidewalk would want to clear at least a path every so often to get to the street.
Okay.
Other questions for the commissioner?
For
Yes,
Mr.
Selectman-
Kleckner, I
Okay.
assume we have the authority to do this. We're invoking an emergency.
Well, I guess the only legal issue that I would see is whether, at the end of the day, we go to the reserve fund and then we have to achieve a unforeseen or unexpected or unforeseen situation, and that's something I guess we would have to clarify. I do believe that is the case. I think the conditions that the commissioner has discussed here are unforeseen and extraordinary. It is unusual, to be honest, but I think it's an opportunity that came out, and I suggested that the commissioner have the opportunity to ask the board whether this is something you'd be willing to do.
So this, you think, is included under the law to be
Yes.
purchased on a?
Yes, I guess the only question I had was whether it could be funded by the reserve fund, and I do believe that that's the case. I mean, ultimately, that would be the town council's review.
This is not a unique situation. We've had this happen in the past, although not quite the same, but we've had a piece of equipment destroyed during a snowstorm, a truck, and we were able to replace that piece of equipment under the same situation.
Right,
So-
and technically, just so that the public understands, what we're talking about is the fact that under state statute, we are allowed to spend money we have not appropriated in our budget, deficit spend, with regard to snow and ice. And so the question that is being raised is whether or not purchase of a sidewalk tractor would qualify for our deficit spending. And we're arguing that we believe it is justified. Okay, other questions about snow and ice?
Well, I have another quick removal question. In the past, there seems to be a change in the way fire hydrants are being shoveled out this year. In the past, I've seen them hand shoveled seemingly by firefighters, and this year I've noticed a bobcat going up and down the street and a bobcat taking the snow out, and I'm wondering, is it DPW? Is it part of your snow removal budget? Was there a conscious change in the way it's being done?
The only change and I was the water and sewer director for 32 some odd years, it was always the responsibility of the Public Works Department, Water and Sewer Division, to clear the hydrants. If we have a situation where hydrants are buried town-wide, we do two things additional to that. Number one, we put a call and ask residents, you know, if there's a hydrant in front of your house, to give us a hand and clear it out. And number two, we do ask the fire department to assist us as well, but the fire department is out there assisting us. It's not the reverse.
I see.
So-
Using bobcats for that, or that, I've never
The
noticed before.
well, yeah, we do it from time to time, because as the winter ages, the banks become more ice and hard snow than you can, you know, shovel with a shovel. So we do send the machines out to actually, you know, the small loaders, we send them out to clear the bank away from the front of the hydrant.
Thank you.
Other questions for the commissioner? Okay. Are we ready to move on this? And I guess I'm going to ask if it would be, we can take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different votes, or we can do a cumulative vote under, okay, well then let's do, then my suggestion is we could consider the work order items, of which there are 4. We can vote them and then separately vote the purchase of the sidewalk tractor. Is that acceptable with everybody? Because we know we're pretty clear about the eligibility for the first 4 items. And I guess I want to just add to my earlier comments that it is anticipated that at the end of the fiscal year, any surplus funds will be used first to cover our deficit spending. And then eventually, we might have to ask for a reserve fund transfer to cover the balance, so.
We will.
We will have to ask. I think we're being
no might.
pretty clear about that. It's not going to happen. Okay, then I'm going to move items, work order number 1 in the amount of $410,000 in connection with contract number PW 14-19, rental rates for snow plowing and ice control with D'Alessandro Corporation, and work order number 1 in the amount of $20,000 in connection with contract number PW 13-2, disposing of leaves and related work with LaRusso Corporation. And I move work order number 1 in the amount of $57,200 in connection with contract number PW 14-1, school grounds maintenance with Park Landscape Associates. And I move work order dash number 1 in the amount of $12,500 in connection with contract number PW 14-3, upkeep of trees and related work with Northern Tree Service. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you very much.
Wait, we're not done yet. You
don't
still
have
want
your
your
snow blower.
bombardier. Finally, I move to approve the emergency purchase in the amount of $132,900 for a bombardier sidewalk tractor. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Benka?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Now, thank you very much.
Okay, go spend your money and get that tractor before they take it away.
Yeah, now we're probably competing with Washington DC and all those places.
South
Now,
Carolina.
I think there were some people who were selling
get it
off
away
their
from us.
ice to the highest bidder,
I
you
think
know.
we are
mean,
for
so
salt.
They're salt, yeah,
Well, my
absolutely.
niece in Arizona works for a company that handles pool supplies, and they were
Ah.
getting all sorts of calls for the salt that
Of
you
course, yeah,
use in
right.
connection with,
Chlorine.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Chlorine. Mm.
Yeah, the chlorines, some kind of
Yeah,
salt
I
thing
I
that
think
they
people who
had.
had salt were doing pretty well this
And
winter.
apparently, there's a wholesaler or importer, shipper in Chelsea, I guess, who was getting calls from Baltimore and up and down the eastern seaboard.
Oh, really?
for
Trying to,
salt.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's in short supply, and we're all in need of it. Okay, we're now going to move on to financial plan. Everybody,
Advisory committee?
yep, ready to go, and we first will discuss the advisory committee, which is either town administrator going to tell us about it, or perhaps
Mr. Bors.
Mr. Bors will tell us about it.
Good evening, Harry Bors, Chairman of the Advisory Committee. First, I should say, I have always loved a snowy winter. I love the snow, but I will confess that sitting in a warm home in the evening watching the snow come down, when I hear the plows go by now, I break out into a cold sweat. And our budget, I will tell you, is not quite as exciting as having to scale snow heaps in the commercial district. We are pretty well level funded. Our only real costs are in personnel. Our executive assistant, Ann Brody, who's terrific. She's very efficient. She actually lives just a couple of blocks away, which is kind of nice, so she can duck in and out as necessary. No other real changes here. As you know, not only do we take up warrant articles and consider budget items, a number of our people are also on standing committees around town, or they may serve on moderators' committees or selectmen's committees. A couple of our members now are on the Override Study Committee, and I know the Override Study Committee is putting in an awful lot of time and effort in their work. So we have a couple of people there, in addition to doing the work at the Advisory Committee. I will say, being chair and being the one who's out in front, I'm the one who generally is the first to hear complaints or take it on the chin because we did something wrong, which is perfectly fine, no complaints. I'm also generally the first one to hear comments, which is nice. But in fact, it really goes to all of the people on the committee who do the work. I generally don't have enough opportunities to acknowledge them or to thank them. It's a great group of people. Like many people in this town, are very committed to the community, and they work very hard at what they do, and it really is a privilege to work with them. We have, I believe, about 25 people on the committee now. Everybody's volunteer. Our only real cost, I said in the budget, for the most part, is one staff person, part-time staff. I think we're at about 25 members now. I should have checked before coming up here. We've had a little leakage over this past year. Neil Wyszynski has gone from the Advisory Committee to Board of Selectmen. Our loss, your gain. Also, one of our other members, Ben Franco, stepped down earlier this year. He's been with us for a number of years. Most recently, he was chairing the subcommittee for Administration and Finance, and he's going to take his experience, and he is now running for Selectmen. So we've lost him as well. So other than that, no new story here, really.
Okay, questions for Mr. Bors? Yes.
More
Selectman Daley?
comment. I just want to tell you that we do really appreciate all the hard work done by the advisory committee. And I know, the reports in the combined reports are great, and we often rely on your investigative skills. I also really like a budget that has a less than 1% increase. That's very good.
There you go.
I think it's the cost of pizza has remained fairly,
Right.
That's it, right.
fairly level this year.
That had to come up.
It all has to do with the spa being closed for several months, I think.
That's right. Well, I can, certainly, Selectman Wyszynski.
I'll just say, I think this is the biggest bargain
Absolutely.
that we have in the entire budget. It's a great group. I miss it. This is a different experience up here.
Thanks a lot.
We don't get to gab.
That's true.
Faint praise.
We don't have the glare of the Klieg lights.
You stepped down to the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
Well, and I think it's fair to say there are 3 members of this Board of Selectmen who served a number of years on the Advisory Committee. Advisory Committee is a fantastic place to learn about the town, to learn about town government, to get into the gritty details of departmental budgets, and to be a better educated person, and probably is good training to become a member of the Board of Selectmen. So you might consider that. At least 3 out of 5 of us did that. Nothing to say at all against the ones who didn't, but anyway. Any questions, any further questions for Mr. Bors? No? then we won't be voting budgets tonight. We're just, collecting information, and I think I can certainly agree with Selectman Daley when it's less than 1% increase. You're probably a shoo-in.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for waiting.
Town Council. Welcome, Ms. Murphy.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Kleckner, Jocelyn Murphy, Acting Town Council. I am not as enthusiastic as Mr. Bors is about the snow, as it will undoubtedly lead to an increase in our pothole settlement account.
Aha. We all have our different views of these things.
That's right.
The
Although
potholes are really huge right now.
would
I mean,
They
like to
sure
say-
are. You could fall
Yeah.
into them and never get out.
Yeah.
I do want to add, though, that I think I mentioned this at an earlier session. I was coming to work one day and encountered a particularly large pothole, and so I accessed Brookline online, and within 24 hours, it was repaired. So I was
Wow.
very
Ah,
pleased with
good.
the response that the DPW followed that up with. As you know, our office, the Office of Legal Services, also known as the Office of Town Council, is comprised of typically 4, but currently 3 attorneys, following the regretful departure of prior Town Council Jennifer DePazzo Gilbert, who, by the way, I've just run into outside, and I believe she'll be
I was
presenting.
going to say, I think she'll be with us later tonight.
Shortly, yeah.
She's not totally gone.
I'm also a bit worried, based on the words you've just said, since our budget seeks an increase of 2.1%, which exceeds the 1% that select person Daley just mentioned. At any rate, the budget is proposing an increase of 2.1%, which largely reflects the elimination of a $10,000 chargeback from the Workers' Compensation Trust Fund that rolls back into our personnel account. Salary step increases of approximately $1,500, supplies in the amount of $700, which frankly is largely for toner, given the amount of copying that we produce regularly. A very modest increase, which again may need to be revisited given the weather, in the claims and settlements of account of $5,000, and a very slight increase in training and conferences, based on my hope and desire that staff, including myself, will participate in some additional trainings in the coming months. At this point, I would like to publicly thank the members of the Office of Town Council for the really extraordinary work that they have done this year. They have really pulled out all of the stops. As you know, we have been very short-staffed, and it's not just a number. We are short-staffed by a very senior member of the office, who all of you know very well, was extraordinarily helpful and competent in the office. And so all of the members of the office have really been pulling double weight to manage, and I really think it's important to thank all of them because they've done a really terrific job. During the course of the year, we have many accomplishments which are largely reflected in the material before you. The office assisted in the recovery of approximately $1 million in tax lien foreclosures, the recovery of personal property taxes and bankruptcy payments. The office recovered more than $54,000 in liens that were asserted against third parties in connection with injuries that had been sustained by public safety personnel. The office assisted the police department in recovering $40,000 in restitution for damage to town property. That would, of course, be damage to vehicles and street signs and things of that nature. The office participated in drafting food sales regulations and in the revision of liquor and lodging house regulations, drafted the warrant articles pertaining to the regulation of medical marijuana dispensaries, participated in the successful revocation of Chapter 149, Section 33B, the very outdated overtime statute, settled a number of claims at the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, denied or settled a significant number of Chapter 84 road defect claims, pothole claims, litigated several personal injury claims involving employee motor vehicle accidents. The office negotiated, drafted, or reviewed hundreds of vendor and building contracts, successfully defended a motion to dismiss in the land court pertaining to the structure on Spooner Road, and later, after the structure was destroyed by fire, guided the relevant parties through the demolition process, negotiated and drafted a number of leases for the school department to address their increasing need for satellite space, represented the school department in all other affairs with the exception of collective bargaining, and provided daily advice to administrators and staff, as well as elected officials, pertaining to what I refer to as garden variety day-to-day legal matters. So as you can see, the office is robust and in fact is growing. I think the office is managed very efficiently and successfully, although I do hope that we are up to a full complement of lawyers in the very near future. Based on all of this, I respectfully ask that you approve the Town Council fiscal year 2015 budget.
Questions? Yes, Selectman Goldstein.
Thank you, and thank you, Jocelyn, for the great work that you've done in the interim here, and appreciate the efforts and appreciate your presentation tonight. I don't have any question or problem with the budget. I have a question about performance workload indicators, and you mentioned it, real estate tax foreclosures. I was surprised that there was almost $1 million under that category this year. It seems like a lot. I'm wondering how many cases that was, and how do you count that? Do you just count filing a tax lien as a foreclosure? You don't mean actually proceeding to a foreclosure sale, I assume, right?
Well, that represents a recovery, which I should add is driven largely by a very aggressive finance director who works in collaboration with our office. I believe that those are liens.
So those are liens placed on, it's not necessarily a foreclosure of the lien, though?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and was there any indicator of why there was such a substantial jump in that figure this year? And anything we can glean from the fact that it's almost doubled from previous years?
So I'm not aware of the answer to that question. I think either the finance director or Attorney Buchheit could answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Selectman Daley.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. One, I noticed that, as Selectman Goldstein just said, the real estate tax foreclosures were up, but the next one, bankruptcy petitions, were way down. So that seemed kind of a startling decrease in the bankruptcy petitions.
Well, you know, these are very fluid and I suppose reflect in some degree the economy. I can't more specifically answer your question, but of course they fluctuate from year to year.
Okay, and the property damages are up a little bit too.
Potholes.
And
Mainly potholes?
I speculate they'll be up even higher within the coming months.
Yeah. Well, I also would just have a question for you, because I was trying to get the attention of someone in your office recently, and I did learn how overworked you all have been recently, and I'm wondering if you need some extra help until there's some final decision made.
Well, the town administrator has very generously said that to the extent we need to access outside counsel funding, that would be looked favorably upon by his office, notwithstanding an approach to the Board of Selectmen. I'm very pleased to say that going into this, and I think the town administrator is likely to say that he didn't anticipate that the process would take as long as it has for filling Attorney Deposit Gilbert's position. I know that he's working hard toward resolution of that. And in the interim, everyone in the office has really stepped up, and I'm tremendously appreciative of that. We have accessed outside counsel funds for only 2 areas of practice, one of those being special ed hearings, which I distinguish from special ed, regular day-to-day special ed matters, which I have been managing, and also in the area of affordable housing funding agreements. We have used outside counsel, but in both of those cases, I was able to successfully negotiate funding from outside sources. So we have not really tapped into outside counsel above and beyond the ordinary use of those funds, which I'm very pleased to report, but frankly, I'm not entirely certain that it will last terribly much longer, but I'm confident that when the appointment to town council is made and a full complement of attorneys is in place, things will return to normal.
Okay. Well, I do appreciate the hard work, but I was gathering that maybe people are stretched beyond the limit right now.
Well, I think you're referring perhaps to an attorney who has a deadline next week, who is particularly aware of that fact. And so,
Right.
everybody
Well,
has
it's
really
also
stepped up.
the deadline for warrant articles next week. which
Indeed.
is why I was trying to get a little attention, but.
Indeed, yeah.
Other questions for Ms. Murphy? No? I will add my own comments that I have relied, and actually Selectman Goldstein and I have relied on the Office of Town Council with regulatory matters, and over the last several years, I think we have just about finished revising all of the food and beverage regulations, which has been a long, slow, but successful work product, and we're very pleased with that. And I've certainly been very pleased to work with Ms. Murphy on a number of issues recently, school issues. Some of them are facility issues, and also the proposal for Hancock Village. So we know that you are all working very hard. And I think each one of us has an experience that we could share if we wanted to, or if it was appropriate. Having said that, it seems to me that there is a good probability that this budget will be approved. But we're not voting them tonight, and we will do them probably in groups over a period of time, and you will hear back from us as to what the status is. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Johnson.
Okay. Board of Selectmen. Wonder who they are.
I guess I can handle that from here, and if there are questions, both Sean and Melissa are here to answer it, but in the interest of time,
Yes.
and knowing that we've
Speed,
asked
speed.
the IT director to not only review his budget, but also summarize the community survey, I'd like to move forward fairly quickly. I'm pleased to report we're below the magical 1% number.
I like it.
And our increase is solely related to step increases in the staffing of the department. And so we've tried very hard to keep everything else level. In fact, we have proposed a level budget with the exception of that less than $5,000 or less than 1% increase. As you know, our office is really a combination of a town-wide, the executive department of the town, where we support the Board of Selectmen and your policy initiatives. And so many of our accomplishments and objectives are related to town-wide efforts, but we also run a department that has many discrete functions, including licensing is one of our major functions. And so I did want to note a couple of accomplishments. First, we did introduce and expand our credit card processing of payments, and we've done a lot of online work, which I think all the restaurants and business associates are very pleased with. I think you also know that we've tried to consolidate some of those entertainment licensing and other things that make it a little easier for the establishments to deal with the town. And the one thing I also want to mention personally, that work closely with you, Madam Chairman, is putting together the Team Brookline project, which is the town's official charity for the Boston Marathon. And we're very pleased to have done that and facilitated even greater charitable donations to the town.
And as I gather, for the marathon coming up, a much enlarged team,
Right.
which will have greater fundraising potential.
Right. We received greater numbers of the invitational
Right.
applications, and also, for whatever reason, our public safety folks that typically run the race are not doing that this year, so those numbers have been allocated to Team Brookline for the charitable fundraising.
Because I actually heard from the firefighters that some of them are running.
Yeah, there are, I think, two.
And there's usually some police.
I mean, they may be running independent of our program, but we do offer them, police, fire, and DPW, opportunities to run using the invitational applications.
Yeah.
And I guess I would like to point out that in the financial plan on page Roman numeral 4-1, and running through Roman numeral 4-3 is a very detailed list of objectives for fiscal 2015, represents the collective objectives of the town administrator and the staff, but also the Board of Selectmen. So it's a long list and only takes as little space as it does because it's in fairly small print. But it's pretty exhaustive and worth taking note of. Questions about the Selectmen's budget from members of the board? Okay, then let us move on to information technology. Mr. Stokes.
While Kevin's getting up and organizing himself, we'd like to just really quickly review the community survey first. This is the first opportunity we've had to even talk about the results of the community survey. We've talked about issuing it, and it's part of the last year's budget message and talking about it this year as well. But it is a official survey that has been issued for the first time, I think, in a long time, or at least as the first time ever to be done such a comprehensive survey of citizen attitudes towards services. So I have a few comments to make afterwards, but I did want to note that this is a survey that has been tested. It's a valid survey, and it's not something we just were able to pull together. We did it in the connection with the International City Management Association and this company that puts together this survey for many jurisdictions throughout the country. So with that, I turn over to Kevin.
And I just will point out, although I'm sure Mr. Stokes will tell us more, that one of the advantages of this is that there is a mass of data baseline information. It's not just isolated in the town of Brookline.
Yes, that's correct.
You have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Kevin Stokes, Chief Information Officer. Yes, just if I could briefly, I'm just trying to be respectful of your time, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't touch upon some of the highlights of the citizen survey, because I think there's a lot of exciting and very valuable data for the town there. Just in terms of the background on the report, it's called the Community Livability Report. It's a nationwide survey that we've partnered with, as Mr. Collector has alluded to, with the National Research Center in partnership with the ICMA, I forget what that acronym means, but with the ICMA. There's approximately 400 other municipalities that have participated in this survey, and they've collectively done it over 700 times. So, Madam Chair, to your question, that's the value of the data. You're able to baseline yourself against a very large set of base information, and more importantly, with a bunch of standardized questions. The survey itself is very, very similar across all jurisdictions. There's approximately 1,200 households that are randomly selected. We were able to get a response rate of 379 residents. Typically, with the survey itself, anywhere from 25% to 40% is what they is what they seek to achieve. We were right in the middle, so in terms of our survey validity and a lot of the data we got, we're right where we should be. It's got a margin of error approximately 5%, which gives it a 95% confidence rate. In terms of the questions and the data itself, it's a very comprehensive set of questions. They're broken down in a couple of different ways, but essentially what they refer to as the three pillars of the community, the overall community characteristics, the governance, and the participation. There's 170 questions that are sort of addressed within those three pillars, and what you're able to get is aggregate data on each of the three, but obviously a lot of very specific data on very specific questions. Some of the highlights, and if you were to net out those 170 questions and what the community's feeling is in terms of the quality of life, is we're very fortunate that the quality of life in Brookline, as indicated in the responses, is quite high. Approximately 97% of the folks that responded indicated that the quality of life is either excellent or good. And I think that that's a tribute to our government, a lot of the natural environment, the built environment, a lot of the facilities programs, and everything that makes up Brookline. So again, there's a whole lot of data underneath all of this, but if you net it out into into one key bullet point in terms of the executive summary, this is really the outcome of that. And to step back just a little bit and look at the three pillars, just to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the breakdown, the community characteristics itself. So in terms of Brookline as a place to live and where you want to be, would you recommend it? Would you recommend it to other folks? Do you look to retire here? again, very similar results in terms of the response rate, very high, very consistent across the board. The next characteristic is governance, and this is, again, a very broad category definition here. This actually speaks to, again, value of the taxes and the services provided, the overall direction of town government, welcoming citizen involvement, confidence in town government, being honest, treating all residents fairly, customer services, and acting in the best interest of the town. So as an aggregate, again, the community feels very strongly about the services that are provided and certainly the confidence in government. And the last key.
I'd be curious
Sure.
offline to see some of the baseline, some of the comparisons.
It's a very large document. I certainly wouldn't do it justice by skimming across it tonight, but we certainly
Yeah,
have
I
a
said
lot of information.
offline.
Yes, absolutely. Just in general, there's a lot of interesting details in terms of the questions and a lot of the data, but we have it, which is great. In terms of participation, specifically, actually, this is the sense of community that the folks have. You know, how welcome do they feel in the community? Would they recommend Brookline? Do they plan on staying here? Again, very high participation rate, very high confidence level in terms of how folks feel about the community and their willingness to participate. There's 30 elements that make up this, so it's a very broad generalization to state how folks feel, but there's a lot of interesting data within here, within certain programs and, you know, certain levels of engagement that I think we can learn from. That's the very high-level overview of a very complicated document and again, and a lot of data. But just some of the conclusions to highlight here. Again, Brookline residents enjoy an exceptionally high quality of life as indicated in the survey responses. Safety was listed as number one in terms of, you know, what folks feel is very important to the community, fall very closely behind with the economy. It's interesting that both of them rated very high in terms they felt very strongly that the economy and the environment's very safe. They also thought it was the two most important things to focus on for the next several years. So there's a, you know, very interesting couple of data points there. The natural environment is appreciated by the residents, and that's higher than the national benchmark as well. So they thought that was a very interesting outcome of this. In terms of what we're looking to do, we do have the document now on the website. Certainly we'll look to publicize it and make sure that folks are aware of it. We're going to, you know, try to do the best we can to articulate the data, certainly make it available the best we can, and, you know, we'll try to make sure that folks have seen it, read it, and, you know, in terms of what we'll do with it. Because there is so much data and because it's so broad and far-reaching, it's I think an excellent tool certainly for a lot of the departments to take a look at how folks view the services that are provided, some of the, you know, the feedback, positive and negative, that we can certainly take away from it. So we feel that it's a very strong tool that we can use, you know, not only setting priorities today, but really where we're looking to go in the future. And hopefully this is you know, a process that we revisit sometime in the future to really be able to see where we're going and you know, where we've improved or where we think we need to focus on going forward. So with that said, is there any questions that I can address on this?
I have a question. I don't kind of get the difference between the two pillars of community characteristic and participation. I mean, community characteristic seems to be the overall quality of life, and do you like what the town is overall, generally? I don't know, understand the difference between overall and general either, but safety, mobility, all these various factors. But yet, we have relatively low, you know, a lower score when it comes to participation, which seems to translate into, despite the fact you think it's a good town, you don't feel connected to it, to use the vernacular that you talked about. To me, I have trouble understanding the distinction between the two and why you would have such a variance in outcomes on those two pillars.
Well, I can tell you that's an accurate observation, because that's sort of what the data does tell you. I wouldn't, you know, garner a reason for why that might be. I think there's a lot of data you could look at to try to break that down a little bit.
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't want to try to provide an answer to that. It's a very complicated question.
Yeah. What's the difference between overall and general as the dashboard, you know, indicated, you know, subcategories of how you feel in these three pillars?
in terms of the difference between them.
I'm looking at figure 1 in the summary. It gives community characteristics, governance, participation. Then it breaks down data in various subcategories. The first one is overall, and the second one is general. To me, they're overall and general.
That has a lot to do with how they summarize all the data, because it's actually 3 pillars that are sliced 8 ways. So
Yeah.
it's, when you get into how they actually net it out, they actually break it into very specific categories. And there's a very detailed technical appendices that are listed with this that will actually provide a lot more data to that.
Yeah, and then there's one of those 8 categories that's broken out as community engagement. Well, that seems to be the same thing as participation, you know? Like,
That's part of
Absolutely, and
Well,
that's why they're able to net out some of these into some executive summary points, because they actually do sort of ask similar questions, very slightly different, in different ways. It gives them a good cross-section of answers that they can then be able to formulate a response on.
If you look at the, and we obviously have summary detail, but if you look at the community engagement items that are in the report on page 8, just for an example, where it says there are different components, how many people volunteered, how many participated in a club, but the strong response, the ones with the high percentage, talked or visited with neighbors, done a favor for a neighbor, read or watched local news, voted in local elections. They're kind of, I guess they have to be more generic because they're going across the whole country.
what
Selectman Benka?
Yeah, what actually, to your point, Ken, what seems to be the distinction is the aspects of community characteristics really seem to be the opportunities.
Yeah.
And participation is whether people took advantage of it.
What you did.
For example, we are similar to the national benchmark in opportunities to volunteer, 75% of the people rating that highly. But actually volunteering, we're lower than the national.
Right. Correct.
We're at 29%. Or recreation and wellness in terms of the community characteristic, we're in the national benchmark for recreational opportunities, but below for participation of actually used Brookline recreation centers. So the community characteristics seem to be, you know, what's available, and the participation is what do people actually do, down to the level of, did you have 5 portions of fruits and vegetables? Which we're very good at.
Dr. Paulson's involved,
Right. I
influence
would
there.
I'd just like to point out, though, that used Brookline recreation centers is below, but visited a town park is at like 91%. So even those two, you kind of wonder where's the line drawn?
So I did want to say that it is our intent to do a more thorough review of this data, but we wanted to get it out there. We've been talking about it. We want to get it on the website, and didn't want to do that without at least summarizing it to the board. But we very much want to have a more robust dialogue about this and presentation of some of the statistics.
I'd be curious, I guess, where you're heading is, are there policy implications in here for us? Things for us to consider doing better than we're doing, refocusing certain things?
I think so. I think that was one of the reasons to do it, is to not just to document
Right.
what we're doing, but can we do things differently or better? I think it's unrealistic to expect we're going to all of a sudden figure these out for the fiscal 15 budget, but certainly
Yeah,
for the
obviously.
longer term, definitely.
Though I'll also note that 71% stated they vote in local elections, yet
Yeah.
our turnout for local elections is
Less than that.
much lower.
Yeah, right. Well, of the respondents, right. Anyway, Selectman Daley?
Yeah, I just have to take issue with one thing. We only got a 58% on welcoming citizen involvement. And we're a town meeting town, and we have many public meetings and lots of committees and everything else. I mean, I thought that was that number, like, doesn't correspond, I think, at all to the reality of citizen involvement in this town.
Yeah, there's also a 73% opportunity to participate in community matters, so I'm not
Yeah,
sure where the
it
distinction
may,
is.
it may be that people read the questions,
Yeah.
in other words, responded differently to the way the questions were actually stated,
There's an opportunity, but they're not welcome to do it.
or whatever. But as Mr. Stokes says, there's plenty for more discussion here, and it's a good step in the right direction, so. that's-
Absolutely, and I would encourage everybody to take a real good look at this, because I think there's a lot of great conversations to be had.
Okay, would you like to talk about your budget now?
If I may just quickly switch gears. So if I may, just to very quickly take you through the world of IT, hopefully I'll make a point here very quickly, I know it's getting late. When you ask, what does IT do, and what projects are you involved in, and what are the things that are most important? In a way, this is sort of the summary of the collective efforts of the department. And just to, kind of very briefly walk you through this, and I apologize, there's a lot going on here, but in terms of what I want to highlight is just sort of the breadth of activities there. This is our, sort of our, what we call our web report, and what this really does is highlights what's going on, what we lovingly refer to as Brook Online. But what it really is this is the interaction with between the public and our workforce, our collective workforce, not the IT workforce, but the collective workforce. Specifically, when you look at, on the left-hand side, our Notify app, that you see the year-over-year change from 2012 to 13 in terms of the number of folks that are using the app to submit work orders for broken meters or graffitis or sidewalks that need to be shoveled, playground equipment that needs to be repaired, those types of things. On the left-hand side, you see all of the e-commerce, and we've had another banner year there, and we're just south of 14 million last year, and that's I don't know what the compound growth on that, but it's pretty impressive. When you look above that, we now have 10 transactions online that you can pay, and we certainly looking to do more. We've got a ton of information. We've got over 100, almost 125 email listservs that we have right now. We've sent out about 650,000 messages in the last year. When you start to look at all this in its totality, we have a lot of information. We have, I think, many tentacles on how we communicate with the public. We're hopefully providing more services and a better way to work with us, in addition to all the, the traditional channels that we've always leveraged. Last year, really just a year ago, we got into the social media world in terms of using Facebook and Twitter, and now that's a key part of our communication with the public, and we have a significant amount of followers that are picking us up regularly. So working in conjunction with public safety, the public schools, the libraries, and DPW, we have a very good unified front in terms of how we communicate with the public, how we promote information, how we promote events, and how we communicate out key important activities. What this really means and what this really drives at is that this is all the technology that's on the front end and on the back end that makes it all, that's imperative that it all works all the time. We have a 24-hour day business. People do pay bills at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I certainly will hear about it if they can't. Our assessors database is hit all day long by the real estate agents, and again, very vocal if things aren't working. To be able to deliver this level of service requires a very, very strong infrastructure, requires a very good governance strategy around having a robust and reliable infrastructure that people know works every day and provides the level of service that's needed. This is just the town component over here. When you start to look on the school side here, and obviously during the school's budget presentation, they'll talk more about the tech plan, but there was a lot of conversations we've had over the last couple of weeks of the tech plan that the schools are really embarking upon is that next generation of recognizing that the textbook now starts to take more of an electronic form, and being able to leverage technology to be able to aid in instruction and student achievement all requires infrastructure, and it requires a lot of infrastructure. It really requires the same amount of focus and the same amount of effort. So to be able to tie all this together, to me, it's part and parcel to the same job, but between the town and the school side, there's still the same amount of demands, the same amount of capacity that's required, the same amount of governance. Really, it's the same amount of operating environment that it's needed to make sure that, again, it has to work every day and it has to be perfect every day. And to bring it back to the budget, that's the major component in the budget increase. And in my particular budget for this year, it's 82,000 in total. 75,000 of it is actually reallocation of a line item for infrastructure from the school budget to the town IT budget. And I think that that's a wise thing, in terms of being able to make sure that we have that infrastructure, a dedicated line item for infrastructure, so that we do continue to invest. And it's very important that as, again, town-school organization and the partnership, we both leverage it and we both need it. I guess I left out all the things we do in terms of controlling the buildings with the same infrastructure as well. So we have a singular purpose infrastructure that serves a lot of different needs. So in terms of the budget that you have in front of you, the 82 is largely taken up by the 75 for the schools, and the balance is for step increases. Outside of that, it's a fairly flat budget, but again, it would be really largely dependent upon all the complicated stuff behind the scenes on that slide. That is really the bulk of the accomplishments, the objectives, and everything that we're doing going forward. So hopefully I didn't breeze through that too quickly, but if there's any questions, I can answer.
I would just add Kevin's point about school technology is a very significant initiative that the school department has raised, multi-year approach, but we're looking at how that's governed and how that's administered, and that's a work in progress. I think the school superintendent has committed to work with us, and so you may see during the budget process some possible changes to the budget related to that, but we don't have anything in mind right at the moment.
Questions? Yes.
I do have a
Bailey.
question about the $75,000, 12.2% increase in services for network infrastructure for the school department. And it said it's part of the superintendent's school IT proposal, and it was backed out of the school appropriation. My question is, why was it backed out of school appropriation? I mean, we've already given them more under the town-school partnership than they would actually be entitled to if we were following the formula. So why are we also assuming additional costs for them on the town side of the budget? I think this was probably not your decision, and I think I'm really asking Mr. Kleckner.
Yeah, it was netted out, so it's been transferred.
Taken from one
essentially.
budget and put into the other one. Reduced school, added town.
We just
Yes.
felt it was more appropriate to account for it.
Okay, my question is, why do you feel it's more appropriate to account for it on the town side of the budget when it's a school cost?
I'd like to answer that one. I have a vested interest to make sure that 75 goes to infrastructure, that, I participate strongly in the standards, the equipment that's purchased, the selection, the time that it takes to get it implemented, all of the above. So certainly from a very selfish reason, I would want to make sure that I have, a complete ownership of that, given that it's so important.
Why is it categorized as services then if it's about infrastructure?
In terms of the line item itself?
Yeah.
It's under the,
Under the administration budget, sub-budget, you have, that $75,000 appears as $75,000 in services.
that's typically where all of our infrastructure dollars are in services. We have a smaller amount in supplies, obviously, everything else is in
I would think
personnel or
I
capital.
would think it would be capital if we were talking about hardware.
It's not just hardware.
So it's hardware, software maintenance, and
But I'd like to answer Selectman Daley's question a little bit more clearly. Because it's a responsibility of the IT department, we want to have more control and accountability for the services that are
So,
provided.
okay, let me just see if I've got this straight, though. The $75,000 is the school appropriation went down by that amount?
Correct.
So it's not that we're,
We're not creating more capacity in the school
okay.
department as a result of that.
okay,
Just transferring
all right, I get it.
And maybe, I assumed, maybe I'm wrong about this, that it is purchase services, which could be a combination of hardware and software and support. Is that right?
That's
Because I know
correct,
those
yes.
things come in packages in information technology.
that is
Okay.
correct, yes.
But when it says it was backed out of the school appropriation, that sounds like the school appropriation is still the same amount, only they don't have to pay this $75,000 and we do. But what you're saying is their appropriation actually went down by that amount. Okay.
In the school technology discussion that I heard, there was a big emphasis on increasing our total network capacity, the pipe that leaves the town for the rest, to the internet. So what's the capacity of that pipe, and are we at capacity? Are we using the capacity? Are we significantly below? Why is there this big push?
The concern is because there's a new testing requirement coming down called PARC, and that's really what's driving a lot of it, is that essentially a lot of the standardized testing will be done online. And a lot of it will be done, in effect, in a duplicative manner, so there's going to be a lot of classrooms taking a test at the same time. That creates some concerns around, do we have enough of a pipe, so to speak, in terms of servicing that. From where we are right now, we're absolutely, I think, in a good place in terms of the capacity that we have. Our organic growth will be sufficient for the short term. We'll continue to evolve, and increase the bandwidth. And typically what we do is as we renegotiate our contracts, we're able to get more for the same price. So, from our standpoint, it's really just a natural contract renegotiation as they come up that we renegotiate. Bandwidth gets cheaper effectively year in, year out. So it doesn't really behoove you to buy a bunch right now. You can get it for the same price if you wait a couple of months anyway. And that's effectively what we're doing.
Yeah, there seemed to be, I think, from what I could see, this overemphasis on the pipe size in the discussions that I heard, where I would argue they should be, you focus on the pipe size. Do you have a big enough pipe? But the first focus should be is on the program. What are you going to do with it?
A lot of it is fear of the unknown. This is the first year that the new testing requirements are coming into play. Nobody really knows what to expect. There's a lot of concern about many things. So in terms of infrastructure, I think, that's probably one of our lesser concerns at the moment.
Delving into a little of the IT weeds, I noticed that you're going to Exchange for email.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Are you doing it in-house, or are you going out to the cloud?
Both. So we will have half of it hosted internally, and then the email service itself will be in the cloud. So what Selectman Wyszynski is referring to is the mechanism by which we use email will actually be outside in the cloud, so to speak. The brains to run it and the brains that make it talk to our other applications effectively will be in-house. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to retain control over critical elements of it, but sort of the boring or the mundane parts of running an email system can be moved frankly off to a data center that can do that better than we can.
Does that make it easier for the NSA to monitor what we're doing?
I'm assuming it's pretty easy right now, but that's another conversation.
Right.
Can I ask, though, as we're doing more payments online and that sort of thing, about security? What are we doing to enhance our security for money matters that we're handling?
Well, in terms of security, we don't store or process anything here internally. So we effectively don't touch credit card information. We have third-party providers that do that. Having said that, if they go south, we go with them. We don't get to point fingers. In terms of how that's governed by industry standard best practices. Visa sets the rules effectively for most of the credit card industries and how they, what they require merchants, and we're a merchant. So our job is to make sure that we stay in compliance, that we test ourselves, and that we continue to evolve the infrastructure. The weakest link in all IT security is always people, and that's your biggest challenge in life, is making sure that people are educated, people use good judgment, good common sense, and they understand the darker, scarier things that are out there. But that's all a constant challenge for any IT organization.
There's been some high-profile incidents recently in which companies' credit card information people had given them was accessed by hackers. I assume that you periodically review what this third-party entity is doing in terms of protecting that information.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the most recent one, Target, that was actually, a human issue. It was a human that had, it was a contractor that had very little security on their laptop. Target had given them to I think, access the building controls, and they were able to actually hack into that computer, which then got to the credit card information. So there's, I don't know the full detail of what happened there, but there are so many paths in, and, you're constantly looking for outside companies to come in and make sure that you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing. But unfortunately, it's also the bad guys are smarter than the good guys for the most part.
Present company excluded.
Yeah, right. Selectman Goldstein?
Thanks. I have a very practical thing I'd like to propose. We have a monitor down in the lobby of Town Hall.
Yes.
Most of the time, it's just showing like a satellite map of
Of the weather, yes.
Massachusetts. Is there a way to program that thing so we could have a list of the meetings and what room they're in at any?
Well, that is there.
constant Florida?
I think the issue is the map stays on for about 30 seconds. So
I never see it on the.
yeah, there
meetings.
actually is, all the meetings are there, and we've been playing with that for a while. So what I did actually leave off is we are moving to a new website that'll probably go live right after town meeting. That will be a lot friendlier, working with our digital signage for downstairs. And, I guess to Selectman Wachinski's question about email, websites are something that, frankly, I'm looking to push out to the cloud, because to keep them running every day and to keep them safe and, all the things we have to do to keep them operational every day is a lot of work. So moving to a different company outside the cloud will allow us to really focus on content and those types of functional elements there. So tying in all of our digital signage, which is what's downstairs, to be able to, tell you where the meetings are, what the rooms are, and
To me, that seems like the function of that monitor should be for that purpose.
but in a roundabout way, I'm not passing the buck, it's a technical problem. So that technology downstairs doesn't work with the existing website that we have, so we actually have to do a lot of stuff in the middle to make it work, and you see, some of the warts, so to speak.
Second question, Brook Online, I think it's a great program. I don't think enough people use it and know about it, but any plans in the works to expand its functions in any way, or to, I use the term loosely, market it better so more people know about it?
With our new website coming out, we're taking a little bit of a pause in some of the Brook Online rollouts right now, because we're actually in the middle of rolling out a new website. Great segue, because really what we're able to do is, specifically with the survey data, what we have also coming behind this is open checkbook, so it's transparency in terms of where our monies are spent. That really helps promote the Brook Online information component. So in terms of meetings, agendas, meeting minutes, open checkbook, all the information that we produce as an organization, that's available, that's all, freedom of information type requests, that's a big part of the next evolution of Brook Online.
Yeah.
We're continuing to put more things online in terms of transactions, what's practical. I don't know if we'll have a longer list in terms of the Notify app, because there's a lot of data that says if you have 20 options for people, they're going to stop using it. So, we won't have more, a longer list than the 10 or 12 pothole-related items, but in terms of information, there's a bulk.
My idea for expansion is more what you started
Yeah.
saying. It seems to me we actually have two systems now. You have the website, the mobile version of the website, that's where you have to go for calendar and
Yeah.
stuff. But Brook Online, it seems to me, should have.
All that will be merged in the new
Should be-
website.
should be one thing.
Yeah, and you're seeing this now, it's happening without us, that there's really there was a blurring of the lines between a mobile device and a laptop and a traditional web browser. You're starting to see sort of the same experience on any device. So I think, a year from now, I don't think you'll see much difference between any device that you're on in terms of what you're looking at.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much for your survey presentation, and also very helpful discussion about your budget. As you've heard us, we're not going to vote anything for a while,
Understandable.
but
Thank you
we'll
very
keep
much.
it on the list.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin.
And I apologize that we're running 1 hour late, but
It's way over the 1%, though.
we are at the last item on the calendar, which is
Because of
the
that 75,000.
I know, I'm just teasing them.
Brookline Place Advisory Committee, who have been waiting in the wings forever. And we've got what I understand to be a draft warrant article, which would be the revised zoning proposal. Is Mr. Bassett the spokesperson?
Well, I'm the introduction.
Okay, all right.
I'm not the heavy hitter. My name's John Bassett. I live at 26 Searle Avenue. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 6, and I'm one of the people on the Selectmen's 2 Brookline Place Advisory Committee. In addition to the people whose names are there, I should say that we've had positive input from Paul Sainer, Hugh Madison, and Mary Lise have attended most or all of the meetings and have added a lot. We've been sitting in the ante room talking about food, so we've had a happy time. We haven't minded waiting, and I think I will say that we have been all over the subject like ants on a banana. 2 of you, of course, are co-chairs, and we have been supported by Kara Bruton, who is here, and will speak. We have met at least 8 times, I counted up. We have a site planning subcommittee and a finance subcommittee. Site planning met once, finance has met at least once, maybe twice, I'm not sure.
Three-ish, maybe.
3-ish? So there have been a lot of meetings, and in fact, we have another meeting this Thursday morning, 8:15, at room 103, at which we hope to vote on a zoning proposal for town meeting. The Children's Hospital, of course, has participated at all of these meetings and has presented a proposal, which is a draft for purposes of zoning only. It's not a design, it's a conceptual plan. There has been a parking consultant. Children's has, the history of this site, of course, goes back at least 11 years, been meetings. I've been meeting about this 11 years. Children's has paid attention to the previous proposals and input from the community, and their present conceptual design actually not only eliminates shadow impacts on Station Street, it reduces and almost eliminates shadow impacts on the Housing and Village Way. It reduces the visual impacts by moving the office tower a bit further away from Station Street and with a smaller footprint, albeit at the same height. And it also reduces the number of parking spaces. As I remember, the 2009 proposal that was permitted had a total of about 932 spaces on the site. Now Children's, and we've haggled about parking, we've argued about parking and talked probably too much about it, but the number of spaces on the site now is somewhere around 680. So there would be, if this is built, a less of an impact on traffic, quite a substantial reduction in the number of parking spaces if 680 are built. I think the last thing that I'll say is we're aware that there are other people, and Jennifer will probably speak some tonight, are working on a memorandum of agreement with Children's, and we see the zoning, which will be ready for the Maytown meeting and the memorandum of agreement as complementary and going together. And I think that all of us on the committee want to see the site developed. I think all of us want to see a reasonable, a good development happen there soon. We're all concerned about time. And I think that all of us feel, and you'll notice that there are people there. I think Ally is somebody who has a business across Station Street. I think all of us feel that the conceptual proposal by Children's is a big step in the right direction, is generally good. And I think we're all, although we're not all agreeing on absolutely everything, I think we all want to make this go forward. So I'll step back and let people with information go. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bruton?
So Kara Bruton, I've had the pleasure to staff this committee with Neil and with Ken, and also with Jennifer DePazzo Gilbert, who's acting as special town council, which is very important. As you remember, the committee's charge was wide range, had a huge range from looking at physical conditions, economic conditions, open space, parking, a lot of the stuff that John's already kind of given a preview about. You also asked the committee to look at the connectivity of this site with adjacent buildings, kind of the surrounding area, and also the Brookline Village T station. And that comes up later on in the presentation. You'll see that work. There is a memorandum of agreement that the committee is providing input for Jennifer and I. And the last bullet here in the charge is important because it's always this question of balancing between zoning and a final design. And in your charge to the committee, you asked them to be mindful that site design work is usually undertaken later by the planning board and the DAT that would follow any zoning. So as John said, we've met several times, about 16 times since last October. Jennifer's our special town counsel. We also hired a town consultant, Pam McKinney, who does real estate finance. She helped us with the Davis Path Study Committee. And then our parking consultant is the other main consultant we've been using, Jason Schreiber from Nelson Nygaard. He's speaking at a Planning Association parking summit coming in mid-April. So we feel very lucky to have this kind of caliber of consultants working for the town. There was also all the meetings are of course open to the public, but through John and Edie, who's with us from the committee, and others did a real concerted effort to do neighborhood outreach for a January meeting. So we had several people from the surrounding neighborhoods attend. I'm going to go through these next couple of slides quickly because you've seen them before. This is existing conditions slide. It's an aerial. You know that there's several different parcels. There's 1 Brookline Place, which is the taller medical office building, 2-4, which is where Skipjack's used to be, where Bertucci's used to be, and then 5 Brookline Place, which is on the corner of Pearl and Brookline Ave, and that's where the daycare is now. When Children's first came to us, one of the first things they wanted to review with the committee, and the committee quickly agreed, is that this is a site that's surrounded by very good transit and soon-to-be pedestrian improvements with Gateway East coming on board, and to have that connection run through the site to the corner of Brookline Ave and Route 9. And that's reflected later in the zoning as well as the proposed site plan. So this is an overlay of the existing and proposed site plan. The proposed buildings are in red. So the new parking garage you see at the top there is about the same as the existing footprint of the parking garage, but does expand about 20 feet or so where the existing surface lot is right now at Brookline Place. The bulk of the building at 2-4 Brookline Place is the same height as back in 2009, but it's a smaller footprint. And then there's a 1 Brookline Place expansion. You can see that wing, that kind of rounded wing at the bottom of the slide that connects off of the existing 1 Brookline Place elevator core and everything else. So this is what we end up with when we take away the existing conditions underlay. And you'll see a big difference between this plan and what's there currently, and also what was proposed in 2009 is the bulk of the open space. It's very obvious in this slide. The bulk of the open space is connected adjacent towards the T station. And that was something the committee was asked very early on, decision to be made about where should the bulk of the open space be. and the committee agreed that it should be adjacent to the T where there's lots of pedestrians and transit riders. So I'm going to walk through 4 questions that the committee's been working on. The very first one is the most basic question that needs to be changed in zoning if this project proceeds. The existing zoning requires that 60% of all parking be below ground for this district. So the question is, should a majority of parking be allowed above ground? That's a very basic question. In order to answer that question, the first thing that the committee did, working with Pam McKinney, and who had access to the financial numbers that Children shared with her as a third party, we are able to confirm that yes, doing all below ground parking would not be financially feasible. And secondly, as John referred to earlier, we looked at shadows from the new parking garage and how that compares with the 2009 plan and also with the existing. And the current scheme has a shorter footprint front to back for 2 Brookline Place, which means the shadow impacts are reduced, as John said, on Station Street and also on Village Way. The parking ratios have been reduced for the whole site, 1 through 5 Brookline Place, whereas before the zoning really just looked at new development. This zoning looks at parking ratios for the entire site. We also looked at, if the parking is going to be allowed above ground, the committee feels that it needs to be limited in height. And so right now we're talking about 55 to 65 feet, and it literally changes, as you'll see in a minute. And then finally, no matter what, there's so many different levers we can use, FAR, floor area ratio, height, open space requirements. The committee felt like it would be a positive thing to count above ground parking towards the floor area ratio and then move the floor area ratio to accommodate that. The thought being that it puts the onus on the developer. For every square foot that they're building above ground, they could be building a square foot of office space instead. So to make that decision point truly, at the point when they need to make those decisions.
Would you just explain in a little more detail why that is a significant decision?
Sure. So I think, yes. So this slide shows both the existing and proposed development as it would look from the sky, kind of from the T angle looking towards Route 9. The Brook House is at the top of the slide. And the first building that you see the ramp, that's the parking garage. Everywhere else in town except for Coolidge Corner, above ground parking does not count towards floor area ratio. So that's one of the basic tools we have in zoning to control the general mass and bulk of structures above ground. In Coolidge Corner, and also the proposal for here is to count the parking garage, even though it's not finished floor area, to count it towards floor area ratio, because it is something that's visually is a mass above ground. Is that what?
Yes,
Yeah.
I just wanted to be clear that in other locations, FAR doesn't normally include above-ground parking, and this is, it's a significant component of the recommendation.
Yeah, it is. This slide represents it's several iterations later. What you see here is a 6.5 level story garage with 600 that can accommodate 680 spaces. We started with an 8.5 story garage that then went to a 7-story garage, and now we're at a 6.5 story garage. This is also kind of a slide that shows some of the work that the committee's been doing. On the left is an existing photo looking from the Brookline Village T Station towards Brookline Place. That red brick building you see there is the existing 1 Brookline Place medical office building. On the right is a proposed, photo rendering. That building you see with the little windows cut out and the dotted line above it, that building is actually one example of what the garage could look like. The dashed line that's above it is where we started when the committee started its work. So the dashed line was where the 8.5 level garage would have gone to, and now in this photo rendering you see the 6.5 level garage. This is another view of the same thing. So this is from Pearl Street. Basically, if you're coming out of Village Way from one of the residential units there, looking across Pearl Street, you see on the left side the existing photo. There's the existing 1 Brookline Place medical office, the existing garage, which is 4 stories. So the existing garage is coming down, being replaced with the proposed garage, which you see at 6.5 stories, and the black dashed line above it shows what the 8.5-story garage would have looked like.
I don't think the mechanical shaft corresponds to the first drawing that we saw. The mechanical shaft was on the other corner of on the back corner of the building, which, and if it was there, there'd be less of an impact. Now, that's a design thing, but just make sure.
So what you're seeing there, that is the stair and elevator core?
Right.
Come over there.
Yeah,
Which
but it
can
would-
go, on this side, it's 55 feet plus 10. So it could only, I mean, that probably overstates what it could be.
But on the other drawing, it was on the
Right,
other
it was on the
corner of the
backside.
building.
Right.
There's two, there's one on each side of.
Okay.
But that one's too big. And the committee recognizes, or is still talking about that one.
I'm going to make another observation, which might or might not, might be premature, and I can understand why the new construction is being represented in light colors, because it's easier to see. But I will point out, and it's very easy to see in this particular set of comparisons, that the dark red brick is less intrusive than the bright white. Down the road, something to remember.
Kara?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, could you, if you just went back, did you say that the existing garage was 4 stories?
Yes.
Is one underground?
It's
One's
sort of,
partially
it's
underground.
depressed. I wouldn't call it underground.
Okay,
Sort of a half story down.
Now,
because it looks like 3 here.
right, but
Yeah.
that end is 3, and then on the other end is
Goes to
4.
Okay.
And it's going to be a similar configuration. The end towards Village Way is going to be lower than the end toward the back.
Could I just ask, as long as the architect is here, are you going to preserve that what is now underground? Can you use that underground space as we do now?
Yes, we're planning on using it.
It's going to come to the mic.
Okay, good.
Right, and
It's only one half used.
folks, I hate to stop this, but you have to speak into the microphone because this is being recorded, and people who are not in the room with us will have blank gaps.
Thank you.
I apologize, but it really is confusing to other folks
And the
if
answer
you
to
don't
my
speak
question-
into the microphone.
Yeah.
So would you mind just giving the answer again into the mic? Sorry.
Sure. Hi, I'm Tim Talon from Elkus Manfredi. Yes, we are planning on using the portion of the footprint of the existing garage, which extends below ground. So not excavating any new portion below grade, but just reusing that space which is already excavated.
Okay, thank you.
So, and actually, this is the drawing that I was referring to. The bottom left corner doesn't appear in this drawing. It doesn't look like that there's a mechanical tower there.
So I think that corner you were saying was, let's see, I can't.
Do you have a pointer? Yeah.
Right.
There's one there.
It was right there.
That didn't seem represented correctly.
No.
I don't know. You might want to look at that, when you show it at town meeting.
Dick, in answer to your question about the below-grade use, basically half of it gets used. If you look at the present garage, there's a ramp that goes down now. That's completely used for parking, but it's roughly half the footprint. So there won't be a full level of parking underground. It's only a half.
And I guess one thing perhaps that, Kara, you may have said, and I missed it, but you might want to comment again. The whole issue here has to do with the contamination on the site and the determination by the environmental consultants that this project can go forward without triggering remediation if there is no excavation. Is that right? more or less, sort of, right?
More or less. There will
Yeah.
be some excavation when they do
They have to
individual
put in
pilings.
piles, but very different from the project that was originally conceived, which had extensive, deep underground parking that would have involved substantial excavation plus remediation for the contamination. So
Right, and-
this project will not make that kind, I mean, it will, presumably it will punch holes in, but it will not create basements, if I can put it in that
Yeah.
sort of way.
So this other thing the slide does is shows the low side and the high side of the proposed parking garage, which is also in the zoning. So the 55 feet is closest to Village Way on the left side of the parking garage, and the 65 feet, as someone said earlier, closer to 10 Brookline Place, just so you see that difference in elevation.
So, and that is, what you showed us a few weeks ago, this is lower
Yeah.
than that, by one floor, is that right?
By a floor, yeah.
At least one.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I think the last time we presented this to you, we showed an 8.5 level garage, and the 8.5 level had it was 75 feet facing Village Way. So what we've done is cut back the top level, that top level, so it's now 55 feet, so 2 levels.
Okay, so just to be clear, it went from 65 feet to 55 feet, 10 feet, no,
20 feet.
20 feet.
From 75 feet.
75 to 55, a reduction of 20 feet.
Correct. On the
Thank you.
Village Way end, yes.
Okay,
It's
good.
worth noting that the last time this board looked at this, we hadn't heard from our independent parking consultant, and it's based on our independent parking consultant's work that we were able to convince Children's Hospital to come down to this level.
Great.
So that brings us to the second question, which is if we're going to allow parking to be above ground, what kind of counterbalancing features do we want to see? You know, what else could happen on the site? And there's three main conversations that have happened under this category. The first one is that the open space that we see, we want it to be identified, protected, both through zoning and also through non-zoning vehicles like the pedestrian easement that Jennifer will speak about in a minute. The second one is to have a wide public pedestrian path that's about 45 feet wide that cuts through the site diagonally, and that connects back to that concept plan you saw in the very beginning, connecting the T to the corner of Brookline Ave and Route 9. And then finally, to increase the required open space for the site up to 35%. That's more than is under existing zoning, and they're proposing about 40%, so the zoning has some wiggle room there. So this is the landscape diagram that you've seen before when Children's presented a concept plan, this idea that there's these 3 different spaces that you're moving through as you go through the green area. And then the site plan that Children's is currently proposing. And you see that there's open space, but there's different characters of open space. Some of it's hardscape, some of it's acts more of a park. So I answered the first 2 questions. Should we have parking above ground? And how do we protect the open space that's in the remainder of the site? The third big question is, if there is going to be parking above ground, how much parking? And this is the one that takes the longest to get through at committees. It's a big topic of discussion. We did having Nelson Nygaard help us get through these questions was very helpful. The number one thing that Nelson Nygaard is recommending is that no matter how many parking spaces we end up with, to require a robust TDM, or Transportation Demand Management Plan, which we did have before, but he's been able to point for us some other projects and other TDM plans that are done in Cambridge and other communities across the country that are robust, have meaningful teeth, that also have enforcement abilities, and that are looked at every year so that the TDM plan can be tweaked and changed, because nobody's going to really know. We can forecast all we want, but nobody's going to really know how this project will work until it's up and running, until the specific tenants are actually up and going, see how those employment programs work, and then adjust where we need to. So that's the most important thing. People don't like to argue about TDM plans because it's abstract, but it is the number one thing that our consultant is saying we need to make sure we have. Secondly, setting the parking ratios. It's not really a change from existing zoning, but right now, you might remember, there's existing zoning that has parking ratios just for this district. And then there's an ability under existing zoning to reduce those parking ratios further by 25% if you do a TDM plan. This was an amendment that Hugh Madison brought to town meeting a couple of years ago. The proposed zoning that the committee's been working on is, let's separate that out. If you're doing a project here, you need to do a TDM plan no matter what, and no matter how many parking spaces you want to build. And then secondly, let's make the minimum instead of all these different ratios. So the 25% reduced ratios are the new minimum in the proposed zoning. And the way that works out with this proposed development is about 612 spaces as the minimum. The committee is generally orbiting around agreeing with Nelson Nygaard's recommendations that around 680, 685 spaces is about right for this development. We're going to talk more on Thursday about if, whether, and how we have a maximum. And the parking maximum could be, the committee recommendations as of last week were to have a maximum for the physical bulk, the striped spaces, but then to allow some allowance that the spaces could be, that the project could accommodate more than 680 spaces as long as it's within that cube, within that parking garage. So we're going to talk more about that, but that's where the committee's at right now. So again, how much parking, I'm going to skip this slide. This is existing and new development, breaking it out by square footage and different parking requirements for each use. Under existing zoning, if this project were permitted today, the minimum number of parking spaces with that 25% reduction would be around 612. Without asking for that 25% reduction, the minimum today would be 814 spaces for the proposed development. This is a long chart, and it kind of walks us through where the committee has been as far as parking. And the important column probably is to look at the total number of spaces, that middle number. So existing conditions is 435 spaces. In 2009, with the, looking at the whole site, they were proposing 1,001 spaces. They were permitted with 963. The square footage has changed a little bit. You can see it's gone from 368,000 to 345,000. What we started our discussions at was around 845 or 832 spaces. With Nelson Nygaard's recommendations ranging between 683 and 717. That's kind of the range that our consultant has recommended, and the current proposal is 680 spaces. So just to kind of march you down all where we've come from. The gross square foot per space, that last column, the higher the gross square foot per space, the less parking spaces there are per built space. I think of this as a little bit different. So existing conditions out there right now, there's about 3 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of office space. And the current proposal is 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet of office space, to give you an idea of where we're at, where we're going. So after we talk about parking, the fourth big question, which has agreement throughout the committee, but that we thought would be good to do since we are going to town meeting, is to basically clean up the zoning language and talk about comprehensive zoning across the whole district. Right now, the existing zoning has very carefully crafted language that applies to a project that's greater than this size but less than another size, and basically carves out a piece, part of the Brookline Place parcel. With the proposed zoning, the floor area ratio, the open space, the pedestrian easement, the parking requirements, the 2-year allowance for a permit, which is under existing, would all apply for the whole entire parcel, so that we know what we're getting kind of going down into the future after our project's permitted. This last slide is the one that you had in your Selectmen's packets. It's probably poorly edited because it truly is exactly what the committee recommended at last week, and we've gone over all of these. But general agreement that the zoning envelope is agreeable and that zoning should be based. The zoning should be drafted that supports that zoning, that supports the proposed development. a 65-foot high parking garage. The head house can go a little bit taller, but the two northeastern faces closest to Village Way to be shorter, which we saw, 55 feet. To have a landscaped open space minimum that's significantly higher than existing conditions and existing zoning. To not have any of the upper floors of landscaped areas be counted as open space under existing zoning. The way it's defined, you could, under existing zoning, meet some of your open space requirements by providing a green roof or a park area on an upper floor, and the committee didn't want that. They wanted the open space to be on the ground floor. And then there's discussion about how much of the impervious and hard surface areas should be allowed within the open space area. And the current proposal you have is 55%. And that's yet to be designed. You know, right now they're about half and half, and that's all to be designed with the Planning Board and Board of Appeals. The next bullet we've already talked about, having both a minimum and a maximum of striped spaces with the ability to seek additional, maybe another 15% of accommodation of cars by special permit within that parking structure.
I'll just say there's, at least on some committee members, feeling a little buyer's remorse on the way that's framed, and I think that's going to be a big topic of discussion on Thursday.
Yeah. We've talked about the FAR, including the above-ground garage, which reflects the current proposal. There's also a 9-foot proposed, this says to be confirmed, but it has since been confirmed since last week, a 9-foot building setback from the property line along Washington and Brookline Avenue. The idea, that comes from Children's Hospital bringing the committee slides of various building to street relationships, so don't worry about what's in between right now, but kind of the sidewalk or landscaping. We looked at buildings in the Longwood Medical area and other prototypes, and about 18 feet from the curb to the building is what felt comfortable. The way the property lines are drawn out there versus the curb line, it kind of floats back and forth. So a 9-foot building setback supports the proposed development that you have in your packets that you've been seeing all along. And then finally, there's a lower building height for the area nearest 5 Brookline Place. There are no plans to do anything with 5 Brookline Place, but again, the committee, in talking about what could possibly happen under new zoning, wanted to lower the maximum building height for the 5 Brookline Place parcel, basically, to kind of break down the massing as you start to turn along Brookline Avenue. I'm going to show you, fly through this exhibit really quick because it kind of, for me, is helpful. It graphically shows all of these different dimensional specifics that are in the zoning. So this first one, you see this wedge that's highlighted here on the northwest corner. That's basically what we're calling the open space, that part of it where that geometry that you see is basically a no-build zone. And again, it's protected under zoning and also as part of a pedestrian easement. The pedestrian easement, Jennifer will go over in a minute, but will include both this open space wedge and the 45-foot pedestrian way, basically, that runs through the site. So the 45-foot separation of pedestrian access through the site is also in the zoning. You'll see that as another sentence broken out in the zoning. The 9-foot setback, which runs along Washington Street and Brookline Avenue, which we just went over previously. The shorter height maximum for 5 Brookline Place. And then the shorter height for the structure that would be closest to Village Way. So that 30-foot setback is basically saying, you know, the building can be 65 feet, but when it gets really close to Village Way, we want it to step down another 10 feet. So of all the recommendations we talked about, the ones highlighted, as Neil suggested, the ones highlighted, I believe, are ones that we're going to be discussing. We're going to be focusing our discussion on Thursday. We also went to the Zoning Bylaw Committee last night, and the Zoning Bylaw Committee didn't take any votes, but there was significant discussion about whether or not there should be a maximum at all. So next steps, that we're looking to get a committee vote this coming Thursday morning. Thursday evening, for anybody that's just interested and wants to get caught up, Charles from Boston Children's Hospital will be coming to do a presentation at a joint planning board EDAB meeting. We do have 2 planning board members on the committee, but the planning board as a whole hasn't seen it yet, so we're going to have that presentation Thursday evening. There's a second zoning bylaw committee meeting this coming Monday, which may or may not take this up again. And then we have a meeting scheduled for Tuesday of next week, where we'll look at a final draft and hopefully get signatures from the committee who would be sponsors of the zoning article. And then Tuesday night, we'll be back in front of you for the Board of Selectmen to sponsor a couple articles that are not zoning but related to this project. So basically dealing with the MOA, the pedestrian easement, other concepts we've talked about tonight. And then, of course, next week is when the warrant closes, and then the whole town meeting review will begin.
Okay, maybe next,
Just ask Kara a
Oh, sure.
question before she
Go
goes.
ahead.
Do you have a picture of the shadows on Village Way with the garage as it is now?
Comparing existing and proposed, is that what you mean?
Well, we
Shadows?
saw shadow studies a couple of weeks ago with significant impact on Village Way. And now that that garage is reduced, I'm wanting to see what the shadows look like now.
What, I can pull that up. It'll take me a minute, but I do.
maybe we can do other things while you
Sure.
dig your image out. So, Ms. Gilbert can talk to us about the underlying documentation
Sure, I'll
that
give
will.
you a brief update on where we are. Kara's gone through everything else in pretty much detail, and she's going to pull up the shadow studies. So next week, we will be back before the board, requesting that the board sponsor 3 separate warrant articles. So altogether, they'll be 4. There'll be the zoning warrant article, which the Brookline Place Advisory Committee will vote on this week to sponsor as petitioners, but there are 3 others related to this site. And the first one is for the town to accept a pedestrian easement, authorize the board to sign and accept a pedestrian easement that will run through the site, like you saw on the slide Kara had up, but it will also include that fanned-out piece to protect the property to the left of the garage and right to the rear of 2-4 Brookline Place. And the term on those will be for 95 years. In addition, there'll be another warrant article authorizing, and that's a 2/3 vote to accept the pedestrian easement. Another warrant article will be to accept a restrictive covenant to protect the tax certainty, also for 95 years. And that will be the tax certainty for the entirety of the 2-4, plus the addition to 1 and the additional net new garage spaces. So everything new will be protected with respect to tax certainty, 100% tax certainty for 95 years. And that's a different structure than what was proposed in 2009. It was going to be just for 2-4 Brookline Place tax certainty, and it was going to be by way of a ground lease, whereby the town would get back into the chain of title. Now, for a variety of reasons, including the fact that the hazardous materials and soils will not be removed from the site, the town will protect the tax certainty by way of a restrictive covenant. And in order for the restrictive covenant to be enforceable, it has to be linked to some interest in the land. And so the way we do that is by way of the pedestrian easement, which you see there in yellow, but also includes that pie-shaped piece. Those agreements, both the pedestrian access easement as well as the restrictive covenant to protect tax certainty, are being drafted. There have been weeks of negotiations, and I hope to send to the board those in a draft form with the 2 connected warrant articles. And the third warrant article would be to authorize the Board of Selectmen to release the agreements from 2009 that are still in escrow, being held by the escrow agent once this deal is solidified, to release those documents, and then a general authorization to enter into any further amendments or agreements to move this project forward under substantially the same terms and conditions in the memorandum of understanding, which in a perfect world would be executed by the Board of Selectmen and Children's Hospitals, the LLC, the entities, excuse me, that own the parcels prior to town meeting.
Is that realistic, Are we at a
It
perfect
is.
world?
It is realistic.
Okay.
We will get it to you, and we'll be back here Tuesday, and the memorandum of understanding is close to being finalized. The board needs to look at the terms. Brookline Place Committee, we've reviewed them in a broad picture as far as the mitigation, and I've gone through that with the board. It's still in negotiation, but I'm happy to speak to any particulars on that if you'd like me to in this session.
Okay. You have your shadow study. Well, let's just get that one first.
Sure, I'm going to have Tim walk through since these are his slides. I don't want to say the wrong things.
Sure.
So this is the shadow study that we showed you before, updated for the 6.5 level garage. So what we've done is, again, the lighter colored shadows are the existing shadows. The dark shadow is the new shadow being cast by the proposed development. And the orange tone that you see right here is the shadow that was cast by the 8.5 level garage that is no longer being cast by the 6.5 level garage. So this is, so again, we looked monthly and hourly in the late afternoon to understand what the shadow impacts on the Village Way buildings would be. So this is the proposed garage mass here. Kind of in the foreground behind us here is 1 Brookline Place. This is 5 Brookline Place. And these are the 2 Village Way buildings. And this is back here. This is the Village Way garage. And Pearl Street, and then Village Way, and Brookline Ave out here. So on August 21st, the shadows are not reaching the buildings of Village Way except in the very late afternoon. And also again in September, so this is September 21st, the shadows are just reaching the base of the Village Way buildings. And this is 39 minutes before sunset. So we can say, basically, for the first 6 months out of the year, there's almost no shadow impact at all on the Village Way buildings. So by October 21st, again, by 2 o'clock p.m., the shadows from the 8.5 level garage were reaching the base of Village Way. That's no longer the case, and they now don't reach it until 3 o'clock. They begin to track across the bottom of the buildings, but again, it's much lower than it was before. And this is November, just reaching the base of the building by 1 o'clock, whereas before by 12 o'clock they were on the building. And earlier in the day, just reaching the lower, here it's just reaching the lower 2 stories of those buildings. And this in the afternoon, this is showing the sun is low enough here where these are the shadows from 10 Brookline Place actually reaching all the way across the site and hitting these buildings. And then December 21st, the shortest day out of the year, still at noon, the shadows are not reaching the Village Way buildings. And by 1 o'clock, hitting the lower story. And then the last 2 hours out of the day, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, then it impacts just these lower floors on this building here.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, are those units townhouse units or are there people that are just in the downstairs unit that get all the shadows?
I don't know the answer to that,
Okay.
yeah. So I also put in your packet the draft zoning article, and we did review that with the zoning bylaw committee last night. We're not asking for any votes tonight from the selectmen, but it would be helpful if you guys had, thoughts that we could bring back to the Brookline Place Committee as they finish up their work.
Maybe we could ask Selectman Benka, who was at the zoning bylaw committee, if he would like to comment.
Sure. Could you, as background for what I'm going to say, Kara, would you mind just putting up the plan that shows the setbacks? That one. Great. There were, I think, 4 items on which the zoning bylaw committee focused, some more trivial than others. One is that the 9-foot, if you look at the bottom, the 9-foot setback is, there's an encroachment in that 9-foot setback by part of the proposed building, and there was some discussion of whether there'd be some way to draft around that in the zoning bylaw rather than having it dealt with by a special permit. There was some discussion about the language and to some extent also the goals or the intent of the language regarding landscaped open space and hard surfaces, and exactly how much of the landscape open space should be hard surfaces, how much should not be hard surfaces, and also the language that was used in the proposed zoning bylaw with regard to the landscaped open space. And I think that those comments are going to get incorporated in the next round. There was, can we go back to that? There was some discussion, and I will confess that I initiated it, regarding the 100-foot no-build dimension in the along Pearl Street near Station Street. It struck me that since the garage is quite a distance from that, just looking to scale, probably 40 to 50 feet from that it would be reasonable either to expand that 100-foot distance to make that a longer no-build zone, or alternatively to measuring from the corner where Pearl Street turns to limit the length of the garage along that dimension in order to preserve that open space. The open space that's being shown is not all protected by the no-build zone that's in the zoning bylaws. It's now written and shown in yellow. The lion's share of our discussion was about the concept of a maximum number of parking spaces, about whether the parking spaces should be limited to 680 spaces or indeed limited at all. And I would just say that while we did not take a formal vote, a majority of the zoning bylaw committee in attendance did not favor a maximum number of parking spaces.
For what reason?
Well, number one, we have never done it in Brookline.
So has that ever stopped us before?
There is no precedent for it, and would it set precedent for future developments to have maximum? Number two, if you have a maximum number of spaces and it's not adequate, it could put pressure on the adjoining streets, on streets used for parking for local businesses, for residents, as people going to Brookline Place park on the street rather than parking in the garage. And number three, if you have a maximum number of parking spaces in the building, it can impose constraints on the future use of this building. If there would be a different use of the building that would require more intensive parking, it could foreclose that use. And I suspect there are other reasons, but those are some of the reasons that were articulated.
Number 4, we're regulating it 2 other ways. We're limiting the height of the parking garage, so we're limiting the envelope that the parking garage can exist in. And then also, we're including the garage in the FAR calculation. So those two additional dimensions really regulate the bulk, the mass of the parking
We don't know
garage.
if those dimensional limitations equate to 680 spaces, though. I mean,
Well,
it's
they-
probably close, but.
Right.
I mean, let me speak personally now. I didn't express an opinion at the zoning bylaw committee yesterday, but to my mind, my major concern is the mass of that garage, the above-ground mass of that garage, rather than the number of parking spaces in it. And I think in my view, if you could get more spaces in that mass, either by reducing the floor-to-floor height somewhat, using more of the already excavated basement, or excavating more in the basement without hitting the groundwater level, or having narrower spaces for compact cars in some portion of that building, I would not have any problem at all, in my view, with there being more cars in that building than 680. My concern is the mass of that building and its impact on the abutters. Basically, the mass of that building is one reason that I'm concerned about that 100-foot no-build zone, and expanding that no-build zone. Though, obviously the FAR limitation is also in place. So I think for a number of reasons, there are individuals who would like to limit the number of cars. I think they feel that that's a desirable goal in itself. I think there are a number of people, and a majority of the zoning bylaw committee did not favor the maximum number of spaces being part of the zoning.
Is there a way to determine how many actual vehicles could be included in the, I don't know how to describe this, the volume that has been proposed for the garage?
So within this volume, the 680 number is how many cars could be parked within the volume that we are showing.
And that's using a regulation standard slot?
That's using the Brookline standard parking space, the Brookline minimum
Right.
standard parking space, which is
Right.
an 8'6" wide space.
Okay. And is there, for example, I mean, I have no idea personally what controls this. Is there, as Selectman Benk has suggested, the possibility of a designated, I don't know, small vehicle? I mean, there are people going around in smarts these days, so
Yes,
you could pack 3 of them into a standard parking space.
That was something that was raised at the zoning bylaw committee last night, which was a good suggestion and something we'll look at.
Because
as a
I've
possibility.
actually
But-
observed smarts parked nose to the curb in a row of 3 in a standard parking place. That's just extraordinary. I mean, that was a street parking space, but even so.
Yeah, there's another way to squeeze more cars
Yeah.
in there, to have managed parking valet.
Right.
Where you can do tandem.
Which actually is part of this
Right.
zoning. And actually, I think
And that's kind
Karen-
of the pressure valve from the developer's perspective.
Well, I guess my other observation is that the parking rates will very much determine how many people park on the street. If it's cheaper to park on the street, they're not going to go in the parking garage. So, that has nothing to do with how many spaces there are, how many vehicles. Selectman Daley?
Yeah, I agree with Selectman Benka. My concern is that mass. I'm happy to see it's lower than it was before. I'm still a little concerned about that big garage. But I am also a little concerned about, I would also say not limit the maximum number of spaces. I know there are people who feel like, don't build it and they will use public transportation.
If you don't build it, they won't come.
Right. The problem is that we are going to get more people using the metered spaces on Station Street and using the other spaces in the neighborhood, making it hard for people to go use those, to find a space to go use those local businesses. So I don't want to limit them too much. And, you know, if you can find some way to put more parking within that mass, I also would be okay with that.
Well, garage management, and I guess this is in the end going to be up to whoever Children's contracts with for the parking garage, could, for example, have short-term rates where people could stay for a short period of time and pay less, you know? I mean, there's lots of different tools that could be used here. But I would certainly agree about the physical size of the garage is the big stumbling block.
But, you know, if you're a patient coming to see your doctor in One Brookline Place or something, you probably want to take the garage if you can, because it's convenient. But if there are no spaces in there, you're going to go out onto our neighborhood and try to find someplace to park.
Good issues.
Good issues. Bear in mind that our consultant says that 680 spaces should do it, though.
Is sufficient. Okay, do we have other questions, either about the zoning language or any of the other design suggestions? I'm just going to raise one. I assume the idea of the setback has to do with the notion of more landscaping, and I'd love to have the landscape architect and/or our own Tom Brady give us some idea about the survivability of trees in that exposed area along Route 9. I know I'm looking at it, I actually was looking at an aerial view, and you've got it actually in one of your other slides. The concentration of trees on the site is actually in that now going to be extension or expansion of the existing office building, and the trees are on Brookline Avenue, not on Route 9, except for the ones that will definitely be removed that are in that little sort of driveway that comes off of Route 9 and goes back to the parking garage. Anyway, it's just a point of whether or not it's sustainable to do trees in those physical places. Other questions?
I had
Yeah.
one question, I think, for Jennifer. Does that pedestrian right-of-way survive the 95-year agreements or not?
Not at the moment, not as drafted, no.
Okay.
And out of curiosity, I thought we used to have 99s. What happened to the other 4 years?
95 or 99. We have a couple that are at 99, but 95 is a term that is financeable for the developer and
Got it.
considered,
Okay, I just-
considered a fee. And
I see, okay, just point of curiosity. All right, well, thank you all. You have done a lot of work, and I know you're on a deadline to get the final recommendations ready by the 13th and the closing of the warrant. So I wish you good luck in accomplishing that, and I know we're going to see and hear more.
Thank you.
But thank you all, appreciate it. And this ends the Board of Selectmen's meeting for Tuesday, March 4th.